Chapter 11. Montalize and Malicorne. Montalize was right. M. de Guiche, thus summoned in every direction, was very much exposed, from such a multiplication of business, to the risk of not attending to any. It so happened that, considering the awkwardness of the interruption, Madame, notwithstanding her wounded pride and secret anger, could not, for the moment at least, reproach Montalize for having violated, in so bold a manner, the semi-royal order with which she had been dismissed on de Guiche's entrance. De Guiche, also, lost his presence of mind, or it would be more correct to say, had already lost it before Montalize's arrival, for scarcely had he heard the young girl's voice, than, without taking leave of Madame, as the most ordinary politeness required, even between persons equal in rank and station, he fled from her presence, his heart tumultuously throbbing, and his brain on fire, leaving the princess with one hand raised, as though to bid him adieu. Montalize was at no loss, therefore, to perceive the agitation of the two lovers. The one who fled was agitated, and the one who remained was equally so. "Well," murmured the young girl, as she glanced inquisitively round her. "This time at least, I think I know as much as the most curious woman could possibly wish to know." Madame felt so embarrassed by this inquisitorial look, that as if she heard Montalize's muttered side remark, she did not speak a word to her maid of honor, but casting down her eyes, retired at once to her bedroom. Montalize, observing this, stood listening for a moment, and then heard Madame lock and bolt her door. By this she knew that the rest of the evening was at her own disposal, and making, behind the door which had just been closed, a gesture which indicated but little real respect for the princess, she went down the staircase in search of Malicorne, who was very busily engaged at that moment in watching a courier, who, covered with dust, had just left the Comte de Guiche's apartments. Montalize knew that Malicorne was engaged in a matter of some importance. She therefore allowed him to look and stretch out his neck as much as he pleased, and it was only when Malicorne had resumed his natural position that she touched him on the shoulder. "Well," said Montalize, "what is the latest intelligence you have?" "M. de Guiche is in love with Madame." "Fine news truly. I know something more recent than that." "Well, what do you know?" "That Madame is in love with M. de Guiche. The one is the consequence of the other." "Not always, my good monsieur. Is that remark intended for me? Present company always excepted." "Thank you," said Malicorne. "Well, and in the other direction what is stirring?" "The king wished, this evening after the lottery, to see Mademoiselle de la Valliere." "Well, and he has seen her?" "No, indeed." "What do you mean by that?" "The door was shut and locked." So that the king was obliged to go back again, looking very sheepish, like a thief who has forgotten his crowbar." "Good. And in the third place?" inquired Montalize. "The courier who has just arrived for de Guiche came from M. de Bragelonne." "Excellent," said Montalize, clapping her hands together. "Why so?" "Because we have work to do. If we get weary now, something unlucky will be sure to happen." "We must divide the work then," said Malicorne, "in order to avoid confusion." "Nothing easier," replied Montalize. 3 intrigues, carefully nursed and carefully encouraged, will produce, one with another, and taking a low average, 3 love letters a day. "Oh!" exclaimed Malicorne, shrugging his shoulders. "You cannot mean what you say, darling. 3 letters a day, that may do for sentimental common people. A musketeer on duty, a young girl in a convent, may exchange letters with their lovers once a day, perhaps from the top of a ladder, or through a hole in the wall. A letter contains all the poetry their poor little hearts have to boast of. But the cases we have in hand require to be dealt with very differently." "Well, finish," said Montalize, out of patience with him. "Someone may come." "Finish? Why, I am only at the beginning. I have still 3 points as yet untouched." "Upon my word, he will be the death of me, with his Flemish indifference," exclaimed Montalize. "And you will drive me mad with your Italian vivacity. I was going to say that our lovers here will be writing volumes to each other. But what are you driving at?" "At this. Not one of our lady correspondents will be able to keep the letters they may receive." "Very likely. M. de Guiche will not be able to keep his either." "That is probable." "Very well then, I will take care of all that." That is the very thing that is impossible, said Malicorne. Why so? Because you are not your own mistress. Your room is as much La Valliere's as yours, and there are certain persons who will think nothing of visiting and searching a maid of honor's room. So that I am terribly afraid of the Queen, who is as jealous as a Spaniard, of the Queen Mother, who is as jealous as a couple of Spaniards, and last of all, of Madame herself, who has jealousy enough for 10 Spaniards. You forgot someone else. Who, monsieur? I was only speaking of the women. Let us add them up, then. We will call Monsieur number 1. De Guiche? Number 2. The Vicomte de Bragelonne? Number 3. And the king? Number 4. Of course the king, who not only will be more jealous, but more powerful than all the rest put together. Ah, my dear. Well, into what a wasp's nest you have thrust yourself, and as yet not quite far enough if you will follow me into it. Most certainly I will follow you where you like. Yet, while we have time, I think it will be prudent to turn back. But I, on the contrary, think the wisest course to take is to put ourselves at once at the head of all these intrigues. You will never be able to do it. With you, I could superintend 10 of them. I am in my element, you must know. I was born to live at the court, as the salamander is made to live in the fire. Your comparison does not reassure me in the slightest degree in the world, my dear Montalice. I have heard it said, and by learned men too, that in the first place there are no salamanders at all, and that if there had been any, they would have been infallibly baked or roasted on leaving the fire. Your learned men may be very wise as far as salamanders are concerned, but they would never tell you what I can tell you, namely, that our de Montalice is destined, before a month is over, to become the first diplomatist in the court of France. Be it so, but on condition that I shall be the second. Agreed. An offensive and defensive alliance, of course. Only be very careful of any letters. I will hand them to you as I receive them. What shall we tell the king about Madame? That Madame is still in love with His Majesty. What shall we tell Madame about the king? That she would be exceedingly wrong not to humor him. What shall we tell La Valliere about Madame? Whatever we choose, for La Valliere is in our power. How so? Every way. What do you mean? In the first place, through the Vicomte de Bragelonne. Explain yourself. You do not forget, I hope, that Monsieur de Bragelonne has written many letters to Mademoiselle de la Valliere. I forget nothing. Well then, it was I who received, and I who intercepted those letters. And consequently, it is you who have them still? Yes. Where here? Oh no, I have them safe at Blois, in the little room you know well enough. That dear little room. That darling little room. The antechamber of the palace. I intend you to live in one of these days. But I beg your pardon, you said that all those letters are in that little room. Yes. Did you not put them in a box? Of course, in the same box where I put all the letters I received from you, and where I put mine also when your business or your amusements prevented you from coming to our rendezvous. Ah, very good, said Malicorne. Why are you satisfied? Because I see there is a possibility of not having to run to Blois after the letters, for I have them here. You have brought the box away? It was very dear to me, because it belonged to you. Be sure and take care of it, for it contains original documents that will be of priceless value by and by. I am perfectly well aware of that indeed, and that is the very reason why I laugh as I do, and with all my heart too. And now one last word. Why last? Do we need anyone to assist us? No one. Valets or maidservants? Bad policy. You will give the letters. You will receive them. Oh, we must have no pride in this affair, otherwise Malicorne and Mademoiselle, or, not transacting their own affairs themselves, will have to make up their minds to see them done by others. You are quite right, but what is going on yonder in M. de Guiche's room? Nothing, he is only opening his window. Let us be gone. And they both immediately disappeared, all the terms of the contract being agreed on. The window just opened was, in fact, that of the Comte de Guiche. It was not alone with the hope of catching a glimpse of Madame through her curtains that he seated himself by the open window, for his preoccupation of mind had at that time a different origin. He had just received, as we have already stated, The courier who had been dispatched to him by Bragelonne, the latter having written to de Guiche a letter which had made the deepest impression upon him, and which he had read over and over again. Strange, strange, he murmured. How irresponsible are the means by which destiny hurries men onward to their fate. Leaving the window in order to approach nearer to the light, he once more read the letter he had just received. Calais. My dear Count, I found M. de Wardes at Calais. He has been seriously wounded in an affair with the Duke of Buckingham. De Wardes is, as you know, unquestionably brave, but full of malevolent and wicked feelings. He conversed with me about yourself, for whom, he says, he has a warm regard, also about Madame, whom he considers a beautiful and amiable woman. He has guessed your affection for a certain person. He also talked to me about the lady for whom I have so ardent a regard, and showed the greatest interest on my behalf in expressing a deep pity for me, accompanied, however, by dark hints which alarmed me at first, but which I at last looked upon as the result of his usual love of mystery. These are the facts. He had received news of the court. You will understand, however, that it was only through M. de Lorraine. The report goes, so says the news, that a change has taken place in the king's affections. You know whom that concerns. Afterwards, the news continues, people are talking about one of the maids of honor, respecting whom various slanderous reports are being circulated. These vague phrases have not allowed me to sleep. I have been deploring, ever since yesterday, that my diffidence and vacillation of purpose, notwithstanding a certain obstinacy of character I may possess, have left me unable to reply to these insinuations. In a word, M. de Wardes was setting off for Paris, and I did not delay his departure with explanations, for it seemed rather hard, I confess, to cross-examine a man whose wounds are hardly yet closed. In short, he traveled by short stages as he was anxious to leave, he said, in order to be present at a curious spectacle the court cannot fail to offer within a short time. He added a few congratulatory words accompanied by vague sympathizing expressions. I could not understand the one any more than the other. I was bewildered by my own thoughts, and tormented by a mistrust of this man. A mistrust which, you know better than anyone else, I have never been able to overcome. As soon as he left, my perceptions seemed to become clearer. It is hardly possible that a man of de Wardes's character should not have communicated something of his own malicious nature to the statements he made to me. It is not unlikely, therefore, that in the strange hints de Wardes threw out in my presence, there may be a mysterious signification, which I might have some difficulty in applying either to myself or to someone with whom you are acquainted. Being compelled to leave as soon as possible, in obedience to the king's commands, the idea did not occur to me of running after de Wardes in order to ask him to explain his reserve, but I have dispatched a courier to you with this letter, which will explain in detail my various doubts. I regard you as myself. You have reflected and observed. It will be for you to act. M. de Wardes will arrive very shortly. Endeavor to learn what he meant, if you do not already know. M. de Wardes, moreover, pretended that the Duke of Buckingham left Paris on the very best of terms with Madame. This was an affair which would have unhesitatingly made me draw my sword, had I not felt that I was under the necessity of dispatching the king's mission before undertaking any quarrel whatsoever. Burn this letter, which Olivain will hand you. Whatever Olivain says, you may confidently rely on. Will you have the goodness, my dear Comte, to recall me to the remembrance of Mademoiselle de la Valliere, whose hands I kiss with the greatest respect. Your devoted, de Bragelonne. P. Est. If anything serious should happen, we should be prepared for everything. Dispatch a courier to me with this one single word, come, and I will be in Paris within 36 hours after the receipt of your letter. De Guiche sighed, folded up the letter a third time, and instead of burning it, as Raoul had recommended him to do, placed it in his pocket. He felt it needed reading over and over again. How much distress of mind, yet what sublime confidence he shows, murmured the Comte. He has poured out his whole soul in this letter. He says nothing of the Comte de la Fere, and speaks of his respect for Louise. He cautions me on my own account, and entreats me on his. Ah, continued de Guiche, with a threatening gesture. You interfere in my affairs, Monsieur de Wardes, do you? Very well then. I will shortly occupy myself with yours. As for you, poor Raoul, you who entrust your heart to my keeping, Be assured I will watch over it." With this promise, de Guiche begged Malicorne to come immediately to his apartments, if possible. Malicorne acknowledged the invitation with an activity which was the first result of his conversation with Montalice. And while de Guiche, who thought that his motive was undiscovered, cross-examined Malicorne, the latter, who appeared to be working in the dark, soon guessed his questioner's motives. The consequence was that after a quarter of an hour's conversation, during which de Guiche thought he had ascertained the whole truth with regard to La Valliere and the king, he had learned absolutely nothing more than his own eyes had already acquainted him with, while Malicorne learned, or guessed, that Raoul, who was absent, was fast becoming suspicious, and that de Guiche intended to watch over the treasure of the Hesperides. Malicorne accepted the office of dragon. De Guiche fancied he had done everything for his friend, and soon began to think of nothing but his personal affairs. The next evening, de Wardes's return and first appearance at the king's reception were announced. When that visit had been paid, the convalescent waited on Monsieur, de Guiche taking care, however, to be at Monsieur's apartments before the visit took place. Chapter 12. How de Wardes was received at court. Monsieur had received de Wardes with that marked favor light and frivolous minds bestow on every novelty that comes in their way. De Wardes, who had been absent for a month, was like fresh fruit to him. To treat him with marked kindness was an infidelity to old friends, and there is always something fascinating in that. Moreover, it was a sort of reparation to de Wardes himself. Nothing, consequently, could exceed the favorable notice Monsieur took of him. The Chevalier de Lorraine, who feared this rival but a little, but who respected a character and disposition only too parallel to his own in every particular, with the addition of a bulldog courage he did not himself possess, received de Wardes with a greater display of regard and affection than even Monsieur had done. De Guiche, as we have said, was there also, but kept in the background, waiting very patiently until all these interchanges were over. De Wardes, while talking to the others, and even to Monsieur himself, had not for a moment lost sight of de Guiche, who he instinctively felt was there on his account. As soon as he had finished with the others, he went up to de Guiche. They exchanged the most courteous compliments, after which de Wardes returned to Monsieur and the other gentlemen. In the midst of these congratulations Madame was announced. She had been informed of de Wardes's arrival, and knowing all the details of his voyage and duel, she was not sorry to be present at the remarks she knew would be made, without delay, by one who, she felt assured, was her personal enemy. 2 or 3 of her ladies accompanied her. De Wardes saluted Madame in the most graceful and respectful manner, and as a commencement of hostilities, announced, in the first place, that he could furnish the Duke of Buckingham's friends with the latest news about him. This was a direct answer to the coldness with which Madame had received him. The attack was a vigorous one, and Madame felt the blow, but without appearing to have even noticed it. He rapidly cast a glance at Monsieur and at de Guiche. The former colored and the latter turned very pale. Madame alone preserved an unmoved countenance, but as she knew how many unpleasant thoughts and feelings her enemy could awaken in the 2 persons who were listening to him, she smilingly bent forward towards the traveler, as if to listen to the news he had brought, but he was speaking of other matters. Madame was brave, even to imprudence. If she were to retreat, it would be inviting an attack. So after the first disagreeable impression had passed away, she returned to the charge. "Have you suffered much from your wounds, Monsieur de Wardes?" she inquired. "For we have been told that you had the misfortune to get wounded." It was now de Wardes's turn to wince. He bit his lips and replied, "No, madam, hardly at all." "Indeed? And yet in this terribly hot weather." "The sea breezes were very fresh and cool, madam, and then I had one consolation." "Indeed? What was it?" "The knowledge that my adversary's sufferings were still greater than my own." "Ah, you mean he was more seriously wounded than you were? I was not aware of that," said the princess with utter indifference. "Oh, madam, you are mistaken, or rather you pretend to misunderstand my remark. I did not say that he was a greater sufferer in body than myself, but his heart was very seriously affected." De Guiche comprehended instinctively from what direction the struggle was approaching. He ventured to make a sign to Madame, as if entreating her to retire from the contest. But she, without acknowledging de Guiche's gesture, without pretending to have noticed it even, and still smiling, continued. Is it possible, she said, that the Duke of Buckingham's heart was touched? I had no idea until now that a heart wound could be cured. Alas, madam, replied de Wardes politely, every woman believes that, and it is this belief that gives them that superiority to man which confidence begets. You misunderstand altogether, dearest, said the prince impatiently. De Wardes means that the Duke of Buckingham's heart had been touched, not by the sword but by something sharper. Ah, very good, exclaimed madame. It is a jest of de Wardes's. Very good, but I should like to know if the Duke of Buckingham would appreciate the jest. It is indeed a very great pity he is not here, de Wardes. The young man's eyes seemed to flash fire. Oh, he said, as he clenched his teeth. There is nothing I should like better. De Guiche did not move. Madame seemed to expect that he would come to her assistance. Monsieur hesitated. The Chevalier de Lorraine advanced and continued the conversation. Madame, he said, de Wardes knows perfectly well that for a Buckingham's heart to be touched is nothing new, and what he has said has already taken place. Instead of an ally, I have two enemies, murmured Madame. Two determined enemies, and in league with each other. And she changed the conversation. To change the conversation is, as everyone knows, a right possessed by princes which etiquette requires all to respect. The remainder of the conversation was moderate enough in tone. The principal actors had rehearsed their parts. Madame withdrew easily, and Monsieur, who wished to question her on several matters, offered her his hand on leaving. The Chevalier was seriously afraid that an understanding might be established between the husband and wife if he were to leave them quietly together. He therefore made his way to Monsieur's apartments, in order to surprise him on his return, and to destroy with a few words all the good impressions Madame might have been able to sow in his heart. De Guiche advanced towards de Wardes, who was surrounded by a large number of persons, and thereby indicated his wish to converse with him. De Wardes at the same time, showing by his looks and by a movement of his head that he perfectly understood him. There was nothing in these signs to enable strangers to suppose they were otherwise than upon the most friendly footing. De Guiche could therefore turn away from him, and wait until he was at liberty. He had not long to wait, for de Wardes, freed from his questioners, approached de Guiche, and after a fresh salutation, they walked side by side together. You have made a good impression since your return, my dear de Wardes, said the Comte. Excellent, as you see. And your spirits are just as lively as ever? Better. And a very great happiness, too. Why not? Everything is so ridiculous in this world. Everything so absurd around us. You are right. You are of my opinion, then? I should think so. And what news do you bring us from yonder? None at all. I have come to look for news here. But tell me, you surely must have seen some people at Boulogne, one of our friends, for instance. It is no great time ago. Some people, one of our friends. Your memory is short. True Brachelon, you mean? Exactly so. Who was on his way to fulfill a mission, with which he was entrusted to King Charles II. Precisely. Well then, did he not tell you, or did not you tell him? I do not precisely know what I told him, I must confess, but I do know what I did not tell him. De Wardes was finesse itself. He perfectly well knew from de Guiche's tone and manner, which was cold and dignified, that the conversation was about to assume a disagreeable turn. He resolved to let it take what course it pleased, and to keep strictly on his guard. May I ask you what you did not tell him? Inquired de Guiche. All about La Valliere. La Valliere? What is it? And what was that strange circumstance you seem to have known over yonder, which Brachelon, who was here on the spot, was not acquainted with? Do you really ask me that in a serious manner? Nothing more so. What? You, a member of the court, living in Madame's household, a friend of Monsieur's, a guest at their table, the favorite of our lovely princess. Guiche colored violently from anger. What princess are you alluding to? He said. I am only acquainted with one, my dear fellow. I am speaking of Madame herself. Are you devoted to another princess, then? Come, tell me. De Guiche was on the point of launching out, but he saw the drift of the remark. A quarrel was imminent between the two young men. De Wardes wished the quarrel to be only in Madame's name. while de Guiche would not accept it except on La Valliere's account. From this moment, it became a series of feigned attacks, which would have continued until one of the two had been touched home. De Guiche therefore resumed all the self-possession he could command. "There is not the slightest question in the world of Madame in this matter, my dear de Wardes," said Guiche, "but simply of what you were talking about just now." "What was I saying?" "That you had concealed certain things from Bragelonne." "Certain things which you know as well as I do," replied de Wardes. "No, upon my honor." "Nonsense. If you tell me what they are I shall know, but not otherwise, I swear." "What? I who have just arrived from a distance of 60 leagues, and you who have not stirred from this place, who have witnessed with your own eyes that which rumor informed me of at Calais. Do you now tell me seriously that you do not know what it is about? Oh, Comte, this is hardly charitable of you." "As you like, de Wardes, but I again repeat I know nothing." "You are truly discreet. Well, perhaps it is very prudent of you. And so you will not tell me anything, will not tell me any more than you told Bragelonne? You are pretending to be deaf, I see. I am convinced that Madame could not possibly have more command over herself than you have." "Double hypocrite," murmured Guiche to himself. "You are again returning to the old subject." "Very well then," continued de Wardes. "Since we find it so difficult to understand each other about La Valliere and Bragelonne, let us speak about your own affairs." "Nay," said de Guiche, "I have no affairs of my own to talk about. You have not said anything about me, I suppose, to Bragelonne, which you cannot repeat to my face." "No, but understand me, Guiche, that however much I may be ignorant of certain matters, I am quite as conversant with others. If, for instance, we were conversing about the intimacies of the Duke of Buckingham at Paris, as I did during my journey with the Duke, I could tell you a great many interesting circumstances. Would you like me to mention them?" De Guiche passed his hand across his forehead, which was covered in perspiration. "No, no," he said. 100 times no. I have no curiosity for matters which do not concern me. The Duke of Buckingham is for me nothing more than a simple acquaintance, whilst Raoul is an intimate friend. I have not the slightest curiosity to learn what happened to the Duke, while I have, on the contrary, the greatest interest in all that happened to Raoul." "In Paris?" "Yes, in Paris or Boulogne. You understand I am on the spot. If anything should happen, I am here to meet it, whilst Raoul is absent, and has only myself to represent him. So Raoul's affairs before my own." "But he will return?" "Not, however, until his mission is completed. In the meantime, you understand, evil reports cannot be permitted to circulate about him without my looking into them." "And for a better reason still, that he will remain some time in London," said de Wardes, chuckling. "You think so?" said de Guiche simply. "Think so indeed. Do you suppose he was sent to London for no other purpose than to go there and return again immediately? No, no, he was sent to London to remain there." "Ah, de Wardes," said de Guiche, grasping de Wardes's hand. "That is a very serious suspicion concerning Bragelonne, which completely confirms what he wrote to me from Boulogne." De Wardes resumed his former coldness of manner. His love of raillery had led him too far, and by his own imprudence, he had laid himself open to attack. "Well, tell me, what did he write to you about?" he inquired. "He told me that you had artfully insinuated some injurious remarks against La Valliere, and that you had seemed to laugh at his great confidence in that young girl." "Well, it is perfectly true I did so," said de Wardes, "and I was quite ready at the time to hear from the Vicomte de Bragelonne that which every man expects from another whenever anything may have been said to displease him. In the same way, for instance, if I were seeking a quarrel with you, I should tell you that Madame, after having shown the greatest preference for the Duke of Buckingham, is at this moment supposed to have sent the handsome Duke away for your benefit." "Oh, that would not wound me in the slightest degree, my dear de Wardes," said de Guiche, smiling, notwithstanding the shiver that ran through his whole frame. "Why, such a favor would be too great a happiness." "I admit that, but if I absolutely wished to quarrel with you, I should try and invent a falsehood, perhaps, and speak to you about a certain arbor, where you and that illustrious princess were together. I should speak also of certain gratifications, of certain kissings of the hand. And you who are so secret on all occasions, so hasty, so punctilious." Well, said de Guiche, interrupting him, with a smile upon his lips, although he almost felt as if he were going to die. I swear I should not care for that, nor should I in any way contradict you, for you must know, my dear Marquis, that for all matters which concern myself I am a block of ice. But it is a very different thing when an absent friend is concerned, a friend, who on leaving, confided his interests to my safekeeping. For such a friend, de Wardes, believe me, I am like fire itself. I understand you, Monsieur de Guiche. In spite of what you say, there cannot be any question between us, just now, either of Bragelonne or of this insignificant girl, whose name is La Valliere. At this moment some of the younger courtiers were crossing the apartment, and having already heard the few words which had just been pronounced, were able also to hear those which were about to follow. De Wardes observed this and continued aloud. Oh, if La Valliere were a coquette like Madame, whose innocent flirtations, I am sure, were first of all the cause of the Duke of Buckingham being sent back to England, and afterwards were the reason of your being sent into exile. For you will not deny, I suppose, that Madame's pretty ways really had a certain influence over you? The courtiers drew nearer to the speakers, Saint-Aignan at their head, and then Manicamp. But my dear fellow, whose fault was that? Said de Guiche, laughing. I am a vain, conceited fellow, I know, and everybody else knows it too. I took seriously that which was only intended as a jest, and got myself exiled for my pains. But I saw my error. I overcame my vanity, and I obtained my recall, by making the amende honorable, and by promising myself to overcome this defect. And the consequence is, that I am so thoroughly cured, that I now laugh at the very thing which 3 or 4 days ago would have almost broken my heart. But Raoul is in love, and is loved in return. He cannot laugh at the reports which disturb his happiness, reports which you seem to have undertaken to interpret, when you know, Marquis, as I do, as these gentlemen do, as every one does in fact, that all such reports are pure calumny. Calumny, exclaimed de Wardes, furious at seeing himself caught in the snare by de Guiche's coolness of temper. Certainly calumny. Look at this letter from him, in which he tells me you have spoken ill of Mademoiselle de la Valliere, and where he asks me, if what you reported about this young girl is true or not. Do you wish me to appeal to these gentlemen, de Wardes, to decide? And with admirable coolness, de Guiche read aloud the paragraph of the letter which referred to La Valliere. And now, continued de Guiche, there is no doubt in the world, as far as I am concerned, that you wish to disturb Bragelonne's peace of mind, and that your remarks were maliciously intended. De Wardes looked round him, to see if he could find support from any one, but at the idea that de Wardes had insulted, either directly or indirectly, the idol of the day, every one shook his head, and de Wardes saw that he was in the wrong. Messieurs, said de Guiche, intuitively divining the general feeling, my discussion with Monsieur de Wardes refers to a subject so delicate in its nature, that it is most important no one should hear more than you have already heard. Close the doors, then, I beg you, and let us finish our conversation in the manner which becomes 2 gentlemen, one of whom has given the other the lie. Messieurs, messieurs, exclaimed those who were present. Is it your opinion, then, that I was wrong in defending Mademoiselle de la Valliere? Said de Guiche. In that case, I pass judgment upon myself, and am ready to withdraw the offensive words I may have used to Monsieur de Wardes. The deuce. Certainly not, said Saint-Aignan. Mademoiselle de la Valliere is an angel. Virtue and purity itself, said Manicamp. You see, Monsieur de Wardes, said de Guiche, I am not the only one who undertakes the defense of that poor girl. I entreat you therefore, messieurs, a second time, to leave us. You see, it is impossible we could be more calm and composed than we are. It was the very thing the courtiers wished. Some went out at one door, and the rest at the other, and the 2 young men were left alone. Well played, said de Wardes to the Comte. Was it not? Replied the latter. How can it be wondered at, my dear fellow? I have got quite rusty in the country, while the command you have acquired over yourself, Comte, confounds me. A man always gains something in women's society. So pray accept my congratulations. I do accept them. And I will make Madame a present of them. And now, my dear Monsieur de Wardes, let us speak as loud as you please. Do not defy me. I do defy you, for you are known to be an evil-minded man. If you do that, you you will be looked upon as a coward too, and Monsieur would have you hanged, this evening, at his window casement. Speak, my dear de Wardes, speak. I have fought already, but not quite enough yet. I see, you would not be sorry to fight with me while my wounds are still open. No, better still. The deuce! You are unfortunate in the moment you have chosen. A duel, after the one I have just fought, would hardly suit me. I have lost too much blood at Boulogne. At the slightest effort my wounds would open again, and you would really have too good a bargain. True, said de Guiche. And yet, on your arrival here, your looks and your arms showed there was nothing the matter with you. Yes, my arms are all right, but my legs are weak, and then I have not had a foil in my hand since that devil of a duel. And you, I am sure, have been fencing every day, in order to carry your little conspiracy against me to a successful issue. Upon my honor, monsieur, replied de Guiche, it is 6 months since I last practiced. No, Comte, after due reflection I will not fight at least with you. I will await Bragelonne's return, since you say it is Bragelonne who finds fault with me. Oh no, indeed. You shall not wait until Bragelonne's return, exclaimed the Comte, losing all command over himself, for you have said that Bragelonne might, possibly, be some time before he returns, and in the meanwhile, your wicked insinuations would have had their effect. Yet, I shall have my excuse. So take care. I will give you a week to finish your recovery. That is better. We will wait a week. Yes, yes, I understand. A week will give time to my adversary to make his escape. No, no. I will not give you 1 day even. You are mad, monsieur, said de Wardes, retreating a step. And you are a coward, if you do not fight willingly. Nay, what is more, I will denounce you to the king, as having refused to fight, after having insulted La Valliere. Ah, said de Wardes, you are dangerously treacherous, though you pass for a man of honor. There is nothing more dangerous than the treachery, as you term it, of the man whose conduct is always loyal and upright. Restore me the use of my legs, then, or get yourself bled, till you are as white as I am, so as to equalize our chances. No, no, I have something better than that to propose. What is it? We will fight on horseback, and will exchange 3 pistol shots each. You are a first-rate marksman. I have seen you bring down swallows with single balls, and at full gallop. Do not deny it, for I have seen you myself. I believe you are right, said de Wardes, and as that is the case, it is not unlikely I might kill you. You would be rendering me a very great service if you did. I will do my best. Is it agreed? Give me your hand upon it. There it is, but on one condition, however. Name it. That not a word shall be said about it to the king. Not a word, I swear. I will go and get my horse then. And I mine. Where shall we meet? In the plain. I know an admirable place. Shall we go together? Why not? And both of them, on their way to the stables, passed beneath Madame's windows, which were faintly lighted. A shadow could be seen behind the lace curtains. There is a woman, said de Wardes, smiling, who does not suspect that we are going to fight, to die perhaps on her account. Chapter 13. The Combat. De Wardes and de Guiche selected their horses, and saddled them with their own hands, with holster saddles. De Guiche, having 2 pairs of pistols, went to his apartments to get them, and after having loaded them, gave the choice to de Wardes, who selected the pair he had made use of 20 times before, the same, indeed, with which de Guiche had seen him kill swallows flying. You will not be surprised, he said, if I take every precaution. You know the weapons well, and consequently, I am only making the chances equal. Your remark was quite useless, replied de Guiche, and you have done no more than you are entitled to do. Now, said de Wardes, I beg you to have the goodness to help me to mount, for I still experience a little difficulty in doing so. In that case, we had better settle the matter on foot. No, once in the saddle, I shall be all right. Very good then, we will not speak of it again, said de Guiche, as he assisted de Wardes to mount his horse. And now, continued the young man, in our eagerness to murder one another, we have neglected one circumstance. What is that? That it is quite dark, and we shall almost be obliged to grope about, in order to kill. Oh, said de Guiche, You are as anxious as I am that everything should be done in proper order. Yes, but I do not wish people to say that you have assassinated me, any more than, supposing I were to kill you, I should myself like to be accused of such a crime. Did anyone make a similar remark about your duel with the Duke of Buckingham? Said de Guiche. It took place precisely under the same conditions as ours. Very true, but there was still light enough to see by, and we were up to our middles almost in the water. Besides, there were a good number of spectators on shore looking at us. De Guiche reflected for a moment, and the thought which had already presented itself to him became more confirmed, that De Wardes wished to have witnesses present, in order to bring back the conversation about Madame, and to give a new turn to the combat. He avoided saying a word in reply therefore, and as De Wardes once more looked at him interrogatively, he replied by a movement of the head, that it would be best to let things remain as they were. The two adversaries consequently set off, and left the chateau by the same gate, close to which we may remember to have seen Montalice and Malicorne together. The night, as if to counteract the extreme heat of the day, had gathered the clouds together in masses which were moving slowly along from the west to the east. The vault above, without a clear spot anywhere visible, or without the faintest indication of thunder, seemed to hang heavily over the earth, and soon began, by the force of the wind, to split into streamers, like a huge sheet torn to shreds. Large and warm drops of rain began to fall heavily, and gathered the dust into globules, which rolled along the ground. At the same time, the hedges, which seemed conscious of the approaching storm, the thirsty plants, the drooping branches of the trees, exhaled 1,000 aromatic odors, which revived in the mind tender recollections, thoughts of youth, endless life, happiness and love. How fresh the earth smells, said De Wardes. It is a piece of coquetry to draw us to her. By the by, replied de Guiche, several ideas have just occurred to me, and I wish to have your opinion upon them. Relative to our engagement. It is quite some time, in fact, that we should begin to arrange matters. Is it to be an ordinary combat, and conducted according to established custom? Let me first know what your established custom is. That we dismount in any particular open space that may suit us, fasten our horses to the nearest object, meet, each without our pistols in our hands, and afterwards retire for 150 paces, in order to advance on each other. Very good. That is precisely the way in which I killed poor Follivant 3 weeks ago at St. Denis. I beg your pardon, but you forgot one circumstance. What is that? That in your duel with Follivant you advanced towards each other on foot, your swords between your teeth, and your pistols in your hands. True. While now, on the contrary, as you cannot walk, you yourself admit that we shall have to mount our horses again, and charge, and the first who wishes to fire will do so. That is the best course, no doubt, but it is quite dark. We must make allowances for more missed shots than would be the case in the daytime. Very well, each will fire 3 times, the pair of pistols already loaded and 1 reload. Excellent. Where shall our engagement take place? Have you any preference? No. You see that small wood which lies before us? The wood which is called Rochin? Exactly. You know it. Perfectly. You know that there is an open glade in the center? Yes. Well, this glade is admirably adapted for such a purpose, with a variety of roads, byplaces, paths, ditches, windings, and avenues. We could not find a better spot. I am perfectly satisfied if you are so. We are at our destination, if I am not mistaken. Yes. Look at the beautiful open space in the center. The faint light which the stars afford seems concentrated in this spot. The woods which surround it seem, with their barriers, to form its natural limits. Very good. Do as you say. Let us first settle the conditions. These are mine. If you have any objection to make, you will state it. I am listening. If the horse be killed, its rider will be obliged to fight on foot. That is a matter of course, since we have no change of horses here. But that does not oblige his adversary to dismount. His adversary will, in fact, be free to act as he likes. The adversaries, having once met in close contact, cannot quit each other under any circumstances, and may, consequently, fire muzzle to muzzle. Agreed. 3 shots and no more will do, I suppose? Quite sufficient, I think. Here are powder and balls for your pistols. Measure out 3 charges, take 3 balls, I will do the same. Then we will throw the rest of the powder and balls away. And we will solemnly swear, said de Wardes, that we have neither balls nor powder about us? Agreed, and I swear it, said de Guiche, holding his hand towards heaven, a gesture which de Wardes imitated. And now, my dear Comte, said de Wardes, allow me to tell you that I am in no way your dupe. You already are, or soon will be, the accepted lover of Madame. I have detected your secret, and you are afraid I shall tell others of it. You wish to kill me, to ensure my silence. That is very clear, and in your place, I should do the same. De Guiche hung down his head. Only, continued de Wardes triumphantly, was it really worthwhile, tell me, to throw this affair of Bragelonne's on my shoulders? But take care, my dear fellow, in bringing the wild boar to bay, you enrage him to madness. In running down the fox, you endow him with the ferocity of the jaguar. The consequence is, that brought to bay by you, I shall defend myself to the very last. You will be quite right to do so. Yes, but take care. I shall work more harm than you think. In the first place, as a beginning, you will readily suppose that I have not been absurd enough to lock up my secret, or your secret rather, in my own breast. There is a friend of mine who resembles me in every way, a man whom you know very well, who shares my secret with me. So pray understand, that if you kill me, my death will not have been of much service to you. Whilst, on the contrary, if I kill you, and everything is possible, you know, you understand. De Guiche shuddered. If I kill you, continued de Wardes, you will have secured 2 mortal enemies to Madame, who will do their very utmost to ruin her. Oh, monsieur, exclaimed de Guiche furiously, do not reckon upon my death so easily. Of the 2 enemies you speak of, I trust most heartily to dispose of one immediately, and the other at the earliest opportunity. The only reply de Wardes made was a burst of laughter, so diabolical in its sound, that a superstitious man would have been terrified. But de Guiche was not so impressionable as that. I think, he said, that everything is now settled, Monsieur de Wardes, so have the goodness to take your place first, unless you would prefer me to do so. By no means, said de Wardes. I shall be delighted to save you the slightest trouble. And spurring his horse to a gallop, he crossed the wide open space, and took his stand at that point of the circumference of the crossroad immediately opposite to where de Guiche was stationed. De Guiche remained motionless. At this distance of 100 paces, the 2 adversaries were absolutely invisible to each other, being completely concealed by the thick shade of elms and chestnuts. A minute elapsed amidst the profoundest silence. At the end of the minute, each of them, in the deep shade in which he was concealed, heard the double click of the trigger, as they put the pistols on full cock. De Guiche, adopting the usual tactics, put his horse to a gallop, persuaded that he should render his safety doubly sure by the movement, as well as by the speed of the animal. He directed his course in a straight line towards the point where, in his opinion, de Wardes would be stationed, and he expected to meet de Wardes about halfway, but in this he was mistaken. He continued his course, presuming that his adversary was impatiently awaiting his approach. When, however, he had gone about 2/3 of the distance, he beheld the trees suddenly illuminated and a ball flew by, cutting the plume of his hat in 2. Nearly at the same moment, and as if the flash of the first shot had served to indicate the direction of the other, a second report was heard, and a second ball passed through the head of de Guiche's horse, a little below the ear. The animal fell. These 2 reports, proceeding from the very opposite direction in which he expected to find de Wardes, surprised him a great deal. But as he was a man of amazing self-possession, he prepared himself for his horse falling, but not so completely, however, that the toe of his boot escaped being caught under the animal as it fell. Very fortunately, the horse in its dying agonies moved so as to enable him to release the leg which was less entangled than the other. De Guiche rose, felt himself all over, and found that he was not wounded. At the very moment he had felt the horse tottering under him, he placed his pistols in the holsters, afraid that the force of the fall might explode one at least, if not both of them, by which he would have been disarmed, and left utterly without defense. Once on his feet, he took the pistols out of the holsters, and advanced towards the spot where, by the light of the flash, he had seen de Wardes appear. De Wardes had, at the first shot, accounted for the maneuver, than which nothing could have been simpler. Instead of advancing to meet de Guiche, or remaining in his place to await his approach, De Wardes had, for about 15 paces, followed the circle of the shadow which hid him from his adversary's observation, and at the very moment when the latter presented his flank in his career, he had fired from the place where he stood, carefully taking aim, and assisted instead of being inconvenienced by the horse's gallop. It has been seen that, notwithstanding the darkness, the first ball passed hardly more than an inch above de Guiche's head. De Wardes had so confidently relied upon his aim, that he thought he had seen de Guiche fall. His astonishment was extreme when he saw he still remained erect in his saddle. He hastened to fire his second shot, but his hand trembled, and he killed the horse instead. It would be a most fortunate chance for him if de Guiche were to remain held fast under the animal. Before he could have freed himself, De Wardes would have loaded his pistol, and had de Guiche at his mercy. But de Guiche, on the contrary, was up, and had 3 shots to fire. De Guiche immediately understood the position of affairs. It would be necessary to exceed De Wardes in rapidity of execution. He advanced, therefore, so as to reach him before he should have had time to reload his pistol. De Wardes saw him approaching like a tempest. The ball was rather tight, and offered some resistance to the ramrod. To load carelessly would be simply to lose his last chance. To take the proper care in loading meant fatal loss of time, or rather, throwing away his life. He made his horse bound on one side. De Guiche turned round also, and at the moment the horse was quiet again, fired, and the ball carried off De Wardes's hat from his head. De Wardes now knew that he had a moment's time at his own disposal. He availed himself of it in order to finish loading his pistol. De Guiche, noticing that his adversary did not fall, threw the pistol he had just discharged aside, and walked straight towards De Wardes, elevating the second pistol as he did so. He had hardly proceeded more than 2 or 3 paces, when De Wardes took aim at him as he was walking, and fired. An exclamation of anger was de Guiche's answer. The Comte's arm contracted and dropped motionless by his side, and the pistol fell from his grasp. His anxiety was excessive. "I am lost," murmured De Wardes. "He is not mortally wounded." At the very moment, however, de Guiche was about to raise his pistol against De Wardes, the head, shoulders, and limbs of the Comte seemed to collapse. He heaved a deep-drawn sigh, tottered, and fell at the feet of De Wardes's horse. "That is all right," said De Wardes, and gathering up the reins he struck his spurs into the horse's sides. The horse cleared the Comte's motionless body, and bore De Wardes rapidly back to the chateau. When he arrived there, he remained a quarter of an hour deliberating within himself, as to the proper course to be adopted. In his impatience to leave the field of battle, he had omitted to ascertain whether de Guiche were dead or not. A double hypothesis presented itself to De Wardes's agitated mind. Either de Guiche was killed, or de Guiche was wounded only. If he were killed, why should he leave his body in that manner to the tender mercies of the wolves? It was a perfectly useless piece of cruelty, for if de Guiche were dead, he certainly could not breathe a syllable of what had passed. If he were not killed, why should he, De Wardes, in leaving him there uncared for, allow himself to be regarded as a savage, incapable of one generous feeling? This last consideration determined his line of conduct. De Wardes immediately instituted inquiries after Manicamp. He was told that Manicamp had been looking after de Guiche, and not knowing where to find him had retired to bed. De Wardes went and awoke the sleeper, without any delay, and related the whole affair to him, which Manicamp listened to in perfect silence, but with an expression of momentarily increasing energy, of which his face could hardly have been supposed capable. It was only when De Wardes had finished, that Manicamp uttered the words, "Let us go." As they proceeded, Manicamp became more and more excited, and in proportion as De Wardes related the details of the affair to him, his countenance assumed every moment a darker expression. "And so," he said, when De Wardes had finished, "you think he is dead?" "Alas, I do." "And you fought in that manner, without witnesses?" He insisted upon it. "It is very singular." "What do you mean by saying it is singular?" "That it is very unlike Monsieur de Guiche's disposition." "You do not doubt my word, I suppose?" Hum. You do doubt it, then?" "A little. But I shall doubt it more than ever. I warn you, if I find the poor fellow is really dead." Monsieur Manicamp. Monsieur de Wardes. It seems you intend to insult me. Just as you please. The fact is, I never did like people who come and say, I have killed such and such a gentleman in a corner. It is a great pity, but I killed him in a perfectly honorable manner. It has an ugly appearance, M. de Wardes. Silence. We have arrived. In fact, the glade could now be seen, and in the open space lay the motionless body of the dead horse. To the right of the horse, upon the dark grass, with his face against the ground, the poor Count lay, bathed in his blood. He had remained in the same spot, and did not even seem to have made the slightest movement. Manicamp threw himself on his knees, lifted the Count in his arms, and found him quite cold, and steeped in blood. He let him gently fall again. Then, stretching out his hand and feeling all over the ground close to where the Count lay, he sought until he found De Guiche's pistol. By heaven, he said, rising to his feet, pale as death and with the pistol in his hand. You are not mistaken, he is quite dead. Dead, repeated de Wardes. Yes, and his pistol is still loaded, added Manicamp, looking into the pan. But I told you that I took aim as he was walking towards me, and fired at him at the very moment he was going to fire at me. Are you quite sure that you fought with him, Monsieur de Wardes? I confess that I am very much afraid it has been a foul assassination. Nay, nay, no exclamations. You have had your 3 shots, and his pistol is still loaded. You have killed his horse, and he, de Guiche, one of the best marksmen in France, has not touched even either your horse or yourself. Well, Monsieur de Wardes, you have been very unlucky in bringing me here. All the blood in my body seems to have mounted to my head, and I verily believe that since so good an opportunity presents itself, I shall blow your brains out on the spot. So, Monsieur de Wardes, recommend yourself to heaven. Monsieur Manicamp, you cannot think of such a thing. On the contrary, I am thinking of it very strongly. Would you assassinate me? Without the slightest remorse, at least for the present. Are you a gentleman? I have given a great many proofs of that. Let me defend my life then at least. Very likely, in order, I suppose, that you may do to me what you have done to poor de Guiche. And Manicamp slowly raised his pistol to the height of de Wardes's breast, and with arms stretched out, and a fixed, determined look on his face, took a careful aim. De Wardes did not attempt a flight. He was completely terrified. In the midst, however, of this horrible silence, which lasted about a second, but which seemed an age to de Wardes, a faint sigh was heard. Oh, exclaimed de Wardes, he still lives. Help, de Guiche, I am about to be assassinated. Manicamp fell back a step or two, and the 2 young men saw the Count raise himself slowly and painfully upon one hand. Manicamp threw the pistol away a dozen paces, and ran to his friend, uttering a cry of delight. De Wardes wiped his forehead, which was covered with a cold perspiration. It was just in time, he murmured. Where are you hurt? Inquired Manicamp of de Guiche. And whereabouts are you wounded? De Guiche showed him his mutilated hand, and his chest covered with blood. Count, exclaimed de Wardes, I am accused of having assassinated you. Speak, I implore you, and say that I fought loyally. Perfectly so, said the wounded man. Monsieur de Wardes fought quite loyally, and whoever says the contrary will make an enemy of me. Then, sir, said Manicamp, assist me in the first place to carry this gentleman home, and I will afterwards give you every satisfaction you please, or if you are in a hurry we can do better still. Let us stanch the blood from the Count's wounds here, with your pocket handkerchief and mine, and then, as there are 2 shots left, we can have them between us. Thank you, said de Wardes. Twice already in 1 hour, I have seen death too close at hand to be agreeable. I don't like his look at all, and I prefer your apologies. Manicamp burst out laughing, and Guiche, too, in spite of his sufferings. The 2 young men wished to carry him, but he declared he felt quite strong enough to walk alone. The ball had broken his ring finger and his little finger, and then had glanced along his side, but without penetrating deeply into his chest. It was the pain rather than the seriousness of the wound, therefore, which had overcome de Guiche. Manicamp passed his arm under one of the Count's shoulders, and de Wardes did the same with the other, and in this way they brought him back to Fontainebleau, to the house of the same doctor who had been present at the death of the Franciscan, Aramis's predecessor. Chapter 14. The King's Supper. The king, while these matters were being arranged, was sitting at the supper table, and the not very large number of guests for that day had taken their seats too, after the usual gesture intimating the royal permission. At this period of Louis XIV's reign, although etiquette was not governed by the strict regulations subsequently adopted, the French court had entirely thrown aside the traditions of good fellowship and patriarchal affability existing in the time of Henry IV, which the suspicious mind of Louis XIII had gradually replaced with pompous state and ceremony, which he despaired of being able fully to realize. The king, therefore, was seated alone at a small separate table, which, like the desk of a president, overlooked the adjoining tables. Although we say a small table, we must not omit to add that this small table was the largest one there. Moreover, it was the one on which were placed the greatest number and quantity of dishes, consisting of fish, game, meat, fruit, vegetables, and preserves. The king was young and full of vigor and energy, very fond of hunting, addicted to all violent exercises of the body, possessing, besides, like all the members of the Bourbon family, a rapid digestion and an appetite speedily renewed. Louis XIV was a formidable table companion. He delighted in criticizing his cooks, but when he honored them by praise and commendation, the honor was overwhelming. The king began by eating several kinds of soup, either mixed together or taken separately. He intermixed, or rather separated, each of the soups by a glass of old wine. He ate quickly and somewhat greedily. Porthos, who from the beginning had, out of respect, been waiting for a jog of D'Artagnan's arm, seeing the king make such rapid progress, turned to the musketeer and said in a low voice, "It seems as if one might go on now. His Majesty is very encouraging, from the example he sets." "Look. The king eats," said D'Artagnan, "but he talks at the same time. Try and manage matters in such a manner that, if he should happen to address a remark to you, he will not find you with your mouth full, which would be very disrespectful." "The best way in that case," said Porthos, "is to eat no supper at all. And yet I am very hungry, I admit, and everything looks and smells most invitingly, as if appealing to all my senses at once." "Don't think of not eating for a moment," said D'Artagnan. "That would put His Majesty out terribly. The king has a saying, that he who works well eats well, and he does not like people to eat indifferently at his table." "How can I avoid having my mouth full if I eat?" said Porthos. "All you have to do," replied the captain of the musketeers, "is simply to swallow what you have in it, whenever the king does you the honor to address a remark to you." "Very good," said Porthos, and from that moment he began to eat with a certain well-bred enthusiasm. The king occasionally looked at the different persons who were at table with him, and en connoisseur could appreciate the different dispositions of his guests. "Monsieur du Vallon," he said. Porthos was enjoying a salmi de livre, and swallowed half of the back. His name, pronounced in such a manner, made him start, and by a vigorous effort of his gullet he absorbed the whole mouthful. "Sire," replied Porthos, in a stifled voice, but sufficiently intelligible, nevertheless. "Let those filets d'agneau be handed to Monsieur du Vallon," said the king. "Do you like brown meats, M. du Vallon?" "Sire, I like everything," replied Porthos. D'Artagnan whispered, "Everything your Majesty sends me." Porthos repeated, "Everything your Majesty sends me," an observation which the king apparently received with great satisfaction. "People eat well who work well," replied the king, delighted to have en tête-à-tête a guest who could eat as Porthos did. "Du Vallon some of my wine," said the king. This was one of the greatest honors of the royal table. D'Artagnan pressed his friend's knee. "If you could only manage to swallow the half of that boar's head I see yonder," said he to Porthos, "I shall believe you will be a duke and peer within the next 12-month. "Presently," said Porthos phlegmatically. "I shall come to that by and by." In fact, it was not long before it came to the boar's turn, for the king seemed to take pleasure in urging on his guest. He did not pass any of the dishes to Porthos until he had tasted them himself, and he accordingly took some of the boar's head. Porthos showed that he could keep pace with his sovereign, and instead of eating the half, as D'Artagnan had told him, he ate 3/4 of it. "It is impossible," said the king in an undertone, "that a gentleman who eats so good a supper every day, and who has such beautiful teeth, can be otherwise than the most straightforward, upright man in my kingdom. Do you hear? Said D'Artagnan in his friend's ear. Yes, I think I am rather in favor, said Porthos, balancing himself on his chair. Oh, you are in luck's way. The king and Porthos continued to eat in the same manner, to the great satisfaction of the other guests, some of whom, from emulation, had attempted to follow them, but were obliged to give up halfway. The king soon began to get flushed, and the reaction of the blood to his face announced that the moment of repletion had arrived. It was then that Louis XIV, instead of becoming gay and cheerful, as most good livers generally do, became dull, melancholy, and taciturn. Porthos, on the contrary, was lively and communicative. D'Artagnan's foot had more than once to remind him of this peculiarity of the king. The dessert now made its appearance. The king had ceased to think anything further of Porthos. He turned his eyes anxiously towards the entrance door, and he was heard occasionally to inquire how it happened that Monsieur de Saint-Aignan was so long in arriving. At last, at the moment when His Majesty was finishing a pot of preserved plums with a deep sigh, Saint-Aignan appeared. The king's eyes, which had become somewhat dull, immediately began to sparkle. The Count advanced towards the king's table, and Louis rose at his approach. Everybody got up at the same time, including Porthos, who was just finishing an almond cake capable of making the jaws of a crocodile stick together. The supper was over. Chapter 15. After supper, the king took Saint-Aignan by the arm, and passed into the adjoining apartment. What has detained you, Count? Said the king. I was bringing the answer, sire, replied the Count. She has taken a long time to reply to what I wrote her. Sire, your Majesty deigned to write in verse, and Mademoiselle de la Valliere wished to repay your Majesty in the same coin, that is to say, in gold. Verses? Saint-Aignan, exclaimed the king in ecstasy. Give them to me at once. And Louis broke the seal of a little letter, enclosing the verses which history has preserved entire for us, and which are more meritorious in invention than in execution. Such as they were, however, the king was enchanted with them, and exhibited his satisfaction by unequivocal transports of delight. But the universal silence which reigned in the rooms warned Louis, so sensitively particular with regard to good breeding, that his delight must give rise to various interpretations. He turned aside and put the note in his pocket, and then advancing a few steps, which brought him again to the threshold of the door close to his guests, he said, Du Vallon, I have seen you today with the greatest pleasure, and my pleasure will be equally great to see you again. Porthos bowed as the Colossus of Rhodes would have done, and retired from the room with his face towards the king. D'Artagnan, continued the king, you will await my orders in the gallery. I am obliged to you for having made me acquainted with Du Vallon. Gentlemen, addressing himself to the other guests, I return to Paris tomorrow on account of the departure of the Spanish and Dutch ambassadors. Until tomorrow, then. The apartment was immediately cleared of the guests. The king took Saint-Aignan by the arm, made him read La Valliere's verses over again, and said, What do you think of them? Charming, sire. They charm me, in fact, and if they were known. Oh, the professional poets would be jealous of them, but it is not likely they will know anything about them. Did you give her mine? Oh, sire, she positively devoured them. They were very weak, I am afraid. That is not what Mademoiselle de la Valliere said of them. Do you think she was pleased with them? I am sure of it, sire. I must answer then. Oh, sire, immediately after supper? Your Majesty will fatigue yourself. You are quite right. Study after eating is notoriously injurious. The labor of a poet especially so, and besides, there is great excitement prevailing at Mademoiselle de la Valliere's. What do you mean? With her as with all the ladies of the court. Why? On account of poor de Guiche's accident. Has anything serious happened to de Guiche then? Yes, sire, he has one hand nearly destroyed, a hole in his breast. In fact, he is dying. Good heavens! Who told you that? Manicamp brought him back just now to the house of a doctor here in Fontainebleau, and the rumor soon reached us all. Brought back? Poor de Guiche, and how did it happen? Ah, that is the very question. How did it happen? You say that in a very singular manner, Saint-Aignan. Give me the details. What does he say himself? He says nothing, sire, but others do. What others? Those who brought him back, sire. Who are they? I do not know, sire, but M. de Manicamp knows. M. de Manicamp is one of his friends. As everybody is indeed, said the king. Oh, no, returned Saint Aignan. You are mistaken, sire. Everyone is not precisely a friend of M. de Guiche. How do you know that? Does your majesty require me to explain myself? Certainly I do. Well, sire, I believe I have heard something said about a quarrel between two gentlemen. When? This very evening, before your majesty's supper was served. That can hardly be. I have issued such stringent and severe ordinances with respect to dueling, that no one, I presume, would dare to disobey them. In that case, heaven preserve me from excusing any one, exclaimed Saint Aignan. Your majesty commanded me to speak, and I spoke accordingly. Tell me then in what way the Comte de Guiche has been wounded. Sire, it is said to have been at a boar hunt. This evening? Yes, sire. One of his hands shattered, and a hole in his breast. Who was at the hunt with M. de Guiche? I do not know, sire, but M. de Manicamp knows or ought to know. You are concealing something from me, Saint Aignan. Nothing, sire, I assure you. Then, explain to me how the accident happened. Was it a musket that burst? Very likely, sire. But yet, on reflection, it could hardly have been that, for de Guiche's pistol was found close by him still loaded. His pistol? But a man does not go to a boar hunt with a pistol, I should think. Sire, it is also said that de Guiche's horse was killed and that the horse is still to be found in the wide open glade in the forest. His horse? Guiche go on horseback to a boar hunt. Saint Aignan, I do not understand a syllable of what you have been telling me. Where did this affair happen? At the Rond Point, in that part of the forest called the Bois Rochin. That will do. Call M. d'Artagnan. Saint Aignan obeyed, and the musketeer entered. Monsieur d'Artagnan, said the king, you will leave this place by the little door of the private staircase. Yes, sire. You will mount your horse. Yes, sire. And you will proceed to the Rond Point du Bois Rochin. Do you know the spot? Yes, sire. I have fought there twice. What? Exclaimed the king, amazed at the reply. Under the edicts, sire, of Cardinal Richelieu, returned d'Artagnan, with his usual impassibility. That is very different, monsieur. You will therefore go there, and will examine the locality very carefully. A man has been wounded there, and you will find a horse lying dead. You will tell me what your opinion is upon the whole affair. Very good, sire. As a matter of course, it is your own opinion I require, and not that of anyone else. You shall have it in an hour's time, sire. I prohibit your speaking with anyone, whoever it may be. Except with the person who must give me a lantern, said d'Artagnan. Oh, that is a matter of course, said the king, laughing at the liberty, which he tolerated in no one but his captain of the musketeers. D'Artagnan left by the little staircase. Now let my physician be sent for, said Louise. 10 minutes afterwards the king's physician arrived, quite out of breath. You will go, monsieur, said the king to him, and accompany M. de Saint Aignan wherever he may take you. You will render me an account of the state of the person you may see in the house you will be taken to. The physician obeyed without a remark, as at that time people began to obey Louis XIV, and left the room preceding Saint Aignan. Do you, Saint Aignan, send Manicamp to me, before the physician can possibly have spoken to him. And Saint Aignan left in his turn. Chapter 16. Showing in what way d'Artagnan discharged the mission with which the king had entrusted him. While the king was engaged in making these last-mentioned arrangements in order to ascertain the truth, d'Artagnan, without losing a second, ran to the stable, took down the lantern, saddled his horse himself, and proceeded towards the place his majesty had indicated. According to the promise he had made, he had not accosted anyone, and as we have observed, he had carried his scruples so far as to do without the assistance of the stable helpers altogether. D'Artagnan was one of those who in moments of difficulty pride themselves on increasing their own value. By dint of hard galloping, he in less than 5 minutes reached the wood, fastened his horse to the first tree he came to, and penetrated to the broad open space on foot. He then began to inspect most carefully on foot and with his lantern in his hand, the whole surface of the Rond-Point, went forward, turned back again, measured, examined, and after half an hour's minute inspection he returned silently to where he had left his horse, and pursued his way in deep reflection and at a foot-pace to Fontainebleau. Louis was waiting in his cabinet. He was alone, and with a pencil was scribbling on paper certain lines which D'Artagnan at the first glance recognized as unequal and very much touched up. The conclusion he arrived at was, that they must be verses. The king raised his head and perceived D'Artagnan. "Well, monsieur," he said, "do you bring me any news?" "Yes, sire." "What have you seen?" "As far as probability goes, sire," D'Artagnan began to reply, "it was certainty I requested of you. I will approach it as near as I possibly can. The weather was very well adapted for investigations of the character I have just made. It has been raining this evening, and the roads were wet and muddy." "Well, the result, D'Artagnan?" "Sire, your majesty told me that there was a horse lying dead in the cross-road of the Bois Rochin, and I began, therefore, by studying the roads. I say the roads, because the center of the crossroad is reached by 4 separate roads. The one that I myself took was the only one that presented any fresh traces. 2 horses had followed it side by side. Their 8 feet were marked very distinctly in the clay. One of the riders was more impatient than the other, for the footprints of the one were invariably in advance of the other about half a horse's length." "Are you quite sure they were traveling together?" said the king. "Yes, sire. The horses are 2 rather large animals of equal pace. Horses well used to maneuvers of all kinds, for they wheeled round the barrier of the Rond-Point together." "Well, and after?" "The 2 cavaliers paused there for a minute, no doubt to arrange the conditions of the engagement. The horses grew restless and impatient. One of the riders spoke, while the other listened and seemed to have contented himself by simply answering. His horse pawed the ground, which proves that his attention was so taken up by listening that he let the bridle fall from his hand." "A hostile meeting did take place then?" "Undoubtedly." "Continue. You are a very accurate observer." "One of the 2 cavaliers remained where he was standing, the one, in fact, who had been listening. The other crossed the open space, and at first placed himself directly opposite to his adversary. The one who had remained stationary traversed the Rond-Point at a gallop, about 2/3 of its length, thinking that by this means he would gain upon his opponent, but the latter had followed the circumference of the wood." "You are ignorant of their names, I suppose?" "Completely so, sire. Only he who followed the circumference of the wood was mounted on a black horse." "How do you know that?" "I found a few hairs of his tail among the brambles which bordered the sides of the ditch." "Go on." "As for the other horse, there can be no trouble in describing him, since he was left dead on the field of battle." "What was the cause of his death?" "A ball which had passed through his brain." "Was the ball that of a pistol or a gun?" "It was a pistol bullet, sire. Besides, the manner in which the horse was wounded explained to me the tactics of the man who had killed it. He had followed the circumference of the wood, in order to take his adversary in flank. Moreover, I followed his foot tracks on the grass." "The tracks of the black horse, do you mean?" "Yes, sire." "Go on, Monsieur D'Artagnan. As your majesty now perceives the position of the 2 adversaries, I will, for a moment, leave the cavalier who had remained stationary for the one who started off at a gallop." "Do so." "The horse of the cavalier who rode at full speed was killed on the spot." "How do you know that?" "The cavalier had not time even to throw himself off his horse, and so fell with it. I observed the impression of his leg, which, with a great effort, he was enabled to extricate from under the horse. The spur, pressed down by the weight of the animal, had plowed up the ground." "Very good. And what did he do as soon as he rose up again?" "He walked straight up to his adversary." "Who still remained upon the verge of the forest?" "Yes, sire. Then, having reached a favorable distance, he stopped firmly, for the impression of both his heels are left in the ground quite close to each other, fired, and missed his adversary." "How do you know he did not hit him?" "I found a hat with a ball through it." "Ah, a proof then," exclaimed the king. "Insufficient, sire," replied D'Artagnan coldly. "It is a hat without any letters indicating its ownership, without arms, a red feather as all hats have. The lace even had nothing particular in it." "Did the man with the hat through which the bullet had passed fire a second time?" Oh, sire, he had already fired twice. How did you ascertain that? I found the waddings of the pistol. And what became of the bullet which did not kill the horse? It cut in two the feather of the hat belonging to him against whom it was directed, and broke a small birch at the other end of the open glade. In that case then the man on the black horse was disarmed, whilst his adversary had still one more shot to fire? Sire, while the dismounted rider was extricating himself from his horse, the other was reloading his pistol. Only he was much agitated while he was loading it, and his hand trembled greatly. How do you know that? Half the charge fell to the ground, and he threw the ramrod aside, not having time to replace it in the pistol. Monsieur d'Artagnan, this is marvelous, you tell me. It is only close observation, sire, and the commonest highwayman could tell as much. The whole scene is before me from the manner in which you relate it. I have, in fact, reconstructed it in my own mind, with merely a few alterations. And now, said the king, let us return to the dismounted cavalier. You were saying that he walked towards his adversary while the latter was loading his pistol. Yes, but at the very moment he himself was taking aim, the other fired. Oh, said the king. And the shot? The shot told terribly, sire. The dismounted cavalier fell upon his face, after having staggered forward 3 or 4 paces. Where was he hit? In 2 places. In the first place in his right hand, and then by the same bullet in his chest. But how could you ascertain that? Inquired the king, full of admiration. By a very simple means. The butt end of the pistol was covered with blood, and the trace of the bullet could be observed, with fragments of a broken ring. The wounded man, in all probability, had the ring finger and the little finger carried off. As far as the hand goes, I have nothing to say, but the chest? Sire, there were 2 small pools of blood, at a distance of about 2.5 feet from each other. At one of these pools of blood the grass was torn up by the clenched hand. At the other, the grass was simply pressed down by the weight of the body. Poor de Guiche, exclaimed the king. Ah, it was M. de Guiche then, said the musketeer quietly. I suspected it, but did not venture to mention it to your majesty. And what made you suspect it? I recognized the de Grammont arms upon the holsters of the dead horse. And you think he is seriously wounded? Very seriously, since he fell immediately, and remained a long time in the same place. However, he was able to walk, as he left the spot, supported by 2 friends. You met him returning then? No, but I observed the footprints of 3 men. The one on the right and the one on the left walked freely and easily, but the one in the middle dragged his feet as he walked. Besides, he left traces of blood at every step he took. Now, monsieur, since you saw the combat so distinctly that not a single detail seems to have escaped you, tell me something about de Guiche's adversary. Oh, sire, I do not know him. And yet you see everything very clearly. Yes, sire, I see everything, but I do not tell all I see. And since the poor devil has escaped, your majesty will permit me to say that I do not intend to denounce him. And yet he is guilty, since he has fought a duel, monsieur. Not guilty in my eyes, sire, said D'Artagnan coldly. Monsieur, exclaimed the king, are you aware of what you are saying? Perfectly, sire, but according to my notions, a man who fights a duel is a brave man. Such, at least, is my own opinion, but your majesty may have another. It is but natural, for you are master here. Monsieur d'Artagnan, I ordered you, however. D'Artagnan interrupted the king by a respectful gesture. You ordered me, sire, to gather what particulars I could, respecting a hostile meeting that had taken place. Those particulars you have. If you order me to arrest M. de Guiche's adversary, I will do so, but do not order me to denounce him to you, for in that case I will not obey. Very well. Arrest him then. Give me his name, sire. The king stamped his foot angrily, but after a moment's reflection he said, You are right, 10 times, 20 times, 100 times right. That is my opinion, sire. I am happy that, this time, it accords with your majesty's. One word more. Who assisted Guiche? I do not know, sire. But you speak of 2 men. There was a person present, then as second. There was no second, sire. Nay, more than that, when M. de Guiche fell, his adversary fled without giving him any assistance. The miserable coward, exclaimed the king. The consequence of your ordinances, sire. If a man has fought well and fairly, and has already escaped one chance of death, he naturally wishes to escape a second. M. de Bouteville cannot be forgotten very easily. And so men turn cowards. No, they become prudent. And he has fled then, you say? Yes, and as fast as his horse could possibly carry him. In what direction? In the direction of the chateau. Well, and after that? Afterwards, as I have had the honor of telling your majesty, 2 men on foot arrived, who carried M. de Guiche back with them. What proof have you that these men arrived after the combat? A very evident proof, sire. At the moment the encounter took place, the rain had just ceased, the ground had not had time to imbibe the moisture, and was consequently soaked. The footsteps sank in the ground, but while M. de Guiche was lying there in a fainting condition, the ground became firm again, and the footsteps made a less sensible impression. Louis clapped his hands together in sign of admiration. Monsieur d'Artagnan, he said, you are positively the cleverest man in my kingdom. The identical thing M. de Richelieu thought, and M. de Mazarin said, sire. And now, it remains for us to see if your sagacity is at fault. Oh, sire, a man may be mistaken. Humanum est errare, said the musketeer philosophically. 1. In that case, you are not human, Monsieur d'Artagnan, for I believe you are never mistaken. Your Majesty said that we were going to see whether such was the case, or not. Yes. In what way, may I venture to ask? I have sent for M. de Manicamp, and M. de Manicamp is coming. And M. de Manicamp knows the secret? De Guiche has no secrets from M. de Manicamp. D'Artagnan shook his head. No one was present at the combat, I repeat, and unless M. de Manicamp was one of the 2 men who brought him back. Hush, said the king, he is coming. Remain and listen attentively. Very good, sire. And at the very same moment, Manicamp and Saint-Aignan appeared at the threshold of the door. Chapter 17. The Encounter. The king signified with an imperious gesture, first to the musketeer, then to Saint-Aignan, on your lives, not a word. D'Artagnan withdrew, like a sentinel, to a corner of the room. Saint-Aignan, in his character of a favorite, leaned over the back of the king's chair. Manicamp, with his right foot properly advanced, a smile upon his lips, and his white and well-formed hands gracefully disposed, advanced to make his reverence to the king, who returned the salutation by a bow. Good evening, M. de Manicamp, he said. Your Majesty did me the honor to send for me, said Manicamp. Yes, in order to learn from you all the details of the unfortunate accident which has befallen the Comte de Guiche. Oh, sire, it is grievous indeed. You were there? Not precisely, sire. But you arrived on the scene of the accident, a few minutes after it took place? Sire, about half an hour afterwards. And where did the accident happen? I believe, sire, the place is called the Rond-Point du Bourrochin. Oh, the rendezvous of the hunt. The very spot, sire. Good. Give me all the details you are acquainted with, respecting this unhappy affair, Monsieur de Manicamp. Perhaps your Majesty has already been informed of them, and I fear to fatigue you with useless repetition. No, do not be afraid of that. Manicamp looked round him. He saw only D'Artagnan leaning with his back against the wainscot, D'Artagnan, calm, kind and good-natured as usual, and Saint-Aignan whom he had accompanied, and who still leaned over the king's armchair with an expression of countenance equally full of good feeling. He determined, therefore, to speak out. Your Majesty is perfectly aware, he said, that accidents are very frequent in hunting. In hunting, do you say? I mean, sire, when an animal is brought to bay. Ah, said the king. It was when the animal was brought to bay then that the accident happened? Alas! Sire, unhappily it was. The king paused for a moment before he said, What animal was being hunted? A wild boar, sire. And what could possibly have possessed de Guiche to go to a wild boar hunt by himself? That is but a clownish idea of sport, only fit for that class of people who, unlike the Marechal de Gramont, have no dogs and huntsmen, to hunt as gentlemen should do. Manicamp shrugged his shoulders. Youth is very rash, he said sententiously. Well, go on, said the king. At all events, continued Manicamp, not venturing to be too precipitate and hasty, and letting his words fall very slowly one by one. At all events, sire, poor de Guiche went hunting, all alone. Quite alone? Indeed. What a sportsman! And is not M. de Guiche aware that the wild boar always stands at bay? That is the very thing that really happened, sire. He had some idea, then, of the beast being there? Yes, sire, some peasants had seen it among their potatoes. 2. And what kind of animal was it? A short, thick beast. You may as well tell me, monsieur, that de Guiche had some idea of committing suicide, for I have seen him hunt, and he is an active and vigorous hunter. Whenever he fires at an animal brought to bay and held in check by the dogs, he takes every possible precaution, and yet he fires with a carbine, and on this occasion he seems to have faced the boar with pistols only. Manicamp started. A costly pair of pistols, excellent weapons to fight a duel with a man and not a wild boar. What an absurdity! There are some things, sire, which are difficult of explanation. You are quite right, and the event which we are now discussing is certainly one of them. Go on. During the recital, Saint Aignan, who probably would have made a sign to Manicamp to be careful what he was about, found that the king's glance was constantly fixed upon himself, so that it was utterly impossible to communicate with Manicamp in any way. As for D'Artagnan, the statue of silence at Athens was far more noisy and far more expressive than he. Manicamp, therefore, was obliged to continue in the same way he had begun, and so contrived to get more and more entangled in his explanation. Sire, he said, this is probably how the affair happened. Guiche was waiting to receive the boar as it rushed towards him. On foot or on horseback? Inquired the king. On horseback. He fired upon the brute and missed his aim, and then it dashed upon him. And the horse was killed. Ah, your majesty knows that then. I have been told that a horse has been found lying dead in the crossroads of the Bois-Rochin, and I presume it was de Guiche's horse. Perfectly true, sire, it was his. Well, so much for the horse, and now for de Guiche? De Guiche, once down, was attacked and worried by the wild boar, and wounded in the hand and in the chest. It is a horrible accident, but it must be admitted it was de Guiche's own fault. How could he possibly have gone to hunt such an animal merely armed with pistols? He must have forgotten the fable of Adonis. Manicamp rubbed his ear in seeming perplexity. Very true, he said. It was very imprudent. Can you explain it, Monsieur Manicamp? Sire, what is written is written. Ah, you are a fatalist. Manicamp looked very uncomfortable and ill at ease. I am angry with you, Monsieur Manicamp, continued the king. With me, sire? Yes. How is it that you, who are de Guiche's intimate friend, and who know that he is subject to such acts of folly, did not stop him in time? Manicamp no longer knew what to do. The tone in which the king spoke was anything but that of a credulous man. On the other hand, it did not indicate any particular severity, nor did he seem to care very much about the cross-examination. There was more of raillery in it than menace. And you say then, continued the king, that it was positively de Guiche's horse that was found dead? Quite positive, sire. Did that astonish you? No, sire, for your majesty will remember that, at the last hunt, M. de Saint-Maur had a horse killed under him, and in the same way. Yes, but that one was ripped open. Of course, sire. Had Guiche's horse been ripped open like M. de Saint-Maur's horse, I should not have been astonished. Manicamp opened his eyes very wide. Am I mistaken? Resumed the king. Was it not in the frontal bone that de Guiche's horse was struck? You must admit, Monsieur de Manicamp, that that is a very singular place for a wild boar to attack. You are aware, sire, that the horse is a very intelligent animal, and he doubtless endeavored to defend himself. But a horse defends himself with his heels and not with his head. In that case the terrified horse may have slipped or fallen down, said Manicamp. And the boar, you understand, sire, the boar. Oh, I understand that perfectly, as far as the horse is concerned, but how about his rider? Well, that too is simple enough. The boar left the horse and attacked the rider, and as I have already had the honor of informing your majesty, shattered de Guiche's hand at the very moment he was about to discharge his second pistol at him, and then, with a gouge of his tusk, made that terrible hole in his chest. Nothing is more likely. Really, Monsieur de Manicamp, you are wrong in placing so little confidence in your own eloquence, and you can tell a story most admirably. Your Majesty is exceedingly kind, said Manicamp, saluting him in the most embarrassed manner. From this day henceforth, I will prohibit any gentleman attached to my court going out to a similar encounter. Really, one might just as well permit dueling. Manicamp started, and moved as if he were about to withdraw. Is your Majesty satisfied? Delighted, but do not withdraw yet, Monsieur de Manicamp, said Louise. I have something to say to you. Well, well, thought D'Artagnan, there is another who is not up to the mark. And he uttered a sigh which might signify, oh, the men of our stamp, where are they now? At this moment an usher lifted up the curtain before the door, and announced the king's physician. Ah, exclaimed Louis, here comes Monsieur Valliere, who has just been to see M. de Guiche. We shall now hear news of the man maltreated by the boar. Manicamp felt more uncomfortable than ever. In this way at least, added the king, our conscience will be quite clear. And he looked at D'Artagnan, who did not seem in the slightest degree discomposed. Chapter 18. The Physician. M. Valliere entered. The position of the different persons present was precisely the same. The king was seated, Saint Aignan leaning over the back of his armchair, D'Artagnan with his back against the wall, and Manicamp still standing. Well, M. Valliere, said the king, did you obey my directions? With the greatest alacrity, sire. You went to the doctor's house in Fontainebleau? Yes, sire. And you found M. de Guiche there? I did, sire. What state was he in? Speak unreservedly. In a very sad state indeed, sire. The wild boar did not quite devour him, however. Devour whom? De Guiche. What wild boar? The boar that wounded him. M. de Guiche wounded by a boar? So it is said at least. By a poacher, rather, or by a jealous husband, or an ill-used lover, who in order to be revenged, fired upon him. What is it that you say, Monsieur Valliere? Were not M. de Guiche's wounds produced by defending himself against a wild boar? M. de Guiche's wounds are the result of a pistol bullet that broke his ring finger and the little finger of the right hand, and afterwards buried itself in the intercostal muscles of the chest. A bullet! Are you sure Monsieur de Guiche was wounded by a bullet? Exclaimed the king, pretending to look much surprised. Indeed I am, sire, so sure in fact that here it is. And he presented to the king a half-flattened bullet, which the king looked at but did not touch. Did he have that in his chest, poor fellow, he asked. Not precisely. The ball did not penetrate, but was flattened, as you see, either upon the trigger of the pistol or upon the right side of the breastbone. Good heavens, said the king seriously. You said nothing to me about this, Monsieur de Manicamp. Sire, what does all this mean then, this invention about hunting a wild boar at nightfall? Come speak, monsieur. Sire. It seems then that you are right, said the king, turning round towards his captain of musketeers, and that a duel actually took place. The king possessed, to a greater extent than anyone else, the faculty enjoyed by the great in power or position, of compromising and dividing those beneath him. Manicamp darted a look full of reproaches at the musketeer. D'Artagnan understood the look at once, and not wishing to remain beneath the weight of such an accusation, advanced a step forward and said, Sire, your Majesty commanded me to go and explore the place where the crossroads meet in the Bois Rochin, and to report to you, according to my own ideas, what had taken place there. I submitted my observations to you, but without denouncing any one. It was your Majesty yourself who was the first to name the Comte de Guiche. Well, monsieur, well, said the king haughtily. You have done your duty, and I am satisfied with you. But you, Monsieur de Manicamp, have failed in yours, for you have told me a falsehood. A falsehood, sire. The expression is a hard one. Find a more accurate then. Sire, I will not attempt to do so. I have already been unfortunate enough to displease your Majesty, and it will, in every respect, be far better for me to accept most humbly any reproaches you may think proper to address to me. You are right, monsieur. Whoever conceals the truth from me risks my displeasure. Sometimes, sire, one is ignorant of the truth. No further falsehood, monsieur, or I double the punishment." Manicamp bowed and turned pale. D'Artagnan again made another step forward, determined to interfere, if the still increasing anger of the king attained certain limits. "You see, monsieur," continued the king, "that it is useless to deny the thing any longer. M. de Guiche has fought a duel." "I do not deny it, sire, and it would have been truly generous on your majesty's part not to have forced me to tell a falsehood." "Forced? Who forced you?" "Sire, M. de Guiche is my friend. Your majesty has forbidden duels under pain of death. A falsehood might save my friend's life, and I told it." "Good," murmured D'Artagnan. "An excellent fellow, upon my word. Instead of telling a falsehood, monsieur, you should have prevented him from fighting," said the king. "Oh, sire, your majesty, who is the most accomplished gentleman in France, knows quite as well as any of us other gentlemen that we have never considered M. de Bouteville dishonored for having suffered death on the Place de Grève. That which does in truth dishonor a man is to avoid meeting his enemy, not to avoid meeting his executioner." "Well, monsieur, that may be so," said Louis XIV. "I am desirous of suggesting a means of your repairing all. If it be a means of which a gentleman may avail himself, I shall most eagerly seize the opportunity." "The name of M. de Guiche's adversary?" Oh, murmured D'Artagnan. "Are we going to take Louis XIII as a model?" "Sire," said Manicamp with an accent of reproach. "You will not name him then?" said the king. "Sire, I do not know him." "Bravo!" murmured D'Artagnan. "Monsieur de Manicamp, hand your sword to the captain." Manicamp bowed very gracefully, unbuckled his sword, smiling as he did so, and handed it for the musketeer to take. But Saint-Aignan advanced hurriedly between him and D'Artagnan. "Sire," he said, "will your majesty permit me to say a word?" "Do so," said the king, delighted, perhaps at the bottom of his heart, for someone to step between him and the wrath he felt he had carried him too far. "Manicamp, you are a brave man, and the king will appreciate your conduct, but to wish to serve your friends too well is to destroy them. Manicamp, you know the name the king asks you for?" "It is perfectly true, I do know it." "You will give it up then?" "If I felt I ought to have mentioned it, I should have already done so." "Then I will tell it, for I am not so extremely sensitive on such points of honor as you are." "You are at liberty to do so, but it seems to me, however—" "Oh, a truce to magnanimity. I will not permit you to go to the Bastille in that way. Do you speak, or I will." Manicamp was keen-witted enough, and perfectly understood that he had done quite sufficient to produce a good opinion of his conduct. It was now only a question of persevering in such a manner as to regain the good graces of the king. "Speak, monsieur," he said to Saint-Aignan. "I have on my own behalf done all that my conscience told me to do, and it must have been very importunate," he added, turning towards the king, "since its mandates led me to disobey your majesty's commands. But your majesty will forgive me, I hope, when you learn that I was anxious to preserve the honor of a lady." "Of a lady?" said the king, with some uneasiness. "Yes, sire." "A lady was the cause of this duel?" Manicamp bowed. "If the position of the lady in question warrants it," he said, "I shall not complain of your having acted with so much circumspection. On the contrary, indeed. Sire, everything which concerns your majesty's household, or the household of your majesty's brother, is of importance in my eyes." "In my brother's household," repeated Louis XIV, with a slight hesitation. "The cause of the duel was a lady belonging to my brother's household, do you say? Or to Madame's?" "Ah, to Madame's?" "Yes, sire." "Well, and this lady is one of the maids of honor of Her Royal Highness Madame la Duchesse d'Orléans, for whom M. de Guiche fought, do you say?" "Yes, sire, and this time I tell no falsehood." Louis seemed restless and anxious. "Gentlemen," he said, turning towards the spectators of this scene, "will you have the goodness to retire for a moment? I wish to be alone with M. de Manicamp. I know he has some important communication to make for his own justification, and which he will not venture before witnesses. Put up your sword, M. de Manicamp." Manicamp returned his sword to his belt. "The fellow decidedly has his wits about him," murmured the musketeer, taking Saint-Aignan by the arm, and withdrawing with him. "He will get out of it," said the latter in D'Artagnan's ear. And with honor too, Comte. Manicamp cast a glance of recognition at Saint Aignan and the captain, which luckily passed unnoticed by the king. Come, come, said D'Artagnan as he left the room. I had an indifferent opinion of the new generation. Well, I was mistaken after all. There is some good in them, I perceive. Valliere preceded the favorite and the captain, leaving the king and Manicamp alone in the cabinet. Chapter 19. Wherein D'Artagnan perceives that it was he who was mistaken, and Manicamp who was right. The king, determined to be satisfied that no one was listening, went himself to the door, and then returned precipitately and placed himself opposite Manicamp. And now we are alone, Monsieur de Manicamp. Explain yourself. With the greatest frankness, sire, replied the young man. And in the first place, pray understand, added the king, that there is nothing to which I personally attach a greater importance than the honor of any lady. That is the very reason, sire, why I endeavored to study your delicacy of sentiment and feeling. Yes, I understand it all now. You say that it was one of the maids of honor of my sister-in-law who was the subject of dispute, and that the person in question, De Guiche's adversary, the man in point of fact, whom you will not name, but whom M. de Saint-Aignan will name, monsieur. Yes, you say, however, that this man insulted someone belonging to the household of Madame. Yes, sire. Mademoiselle de la Valliere. Ah, said the king, as if he had expected the name, and yet as if its announcement had caused him a sudden pang. Ah, it was Mademoiselle de la Valliere who was insulted. I do not say precisely that she was insulted, sire. But at all events, I merely say that she was spoken of in terms far enough from respectful. A man dares to speak in disrespectful terms of Mademoiselle de la Valliere, and yet you refuse to tell me the name of the insulter? Sire, I thought it was quite understood that your Majesty had abandoned the idea of making me denounce him. Perfectly true, monsieur, returned the king, controlling his anger. Besides, I shall know in good time the name of this man whom I shall feel it my duty to punish. Manicamp perceived that they had returned to the question again. As for the king, he saw he had allowed himself to be hurried away a little too far, and therefore continued, And I will punish him, not because there is any question of Mademoiselle de la Valliere, although I esteem her very highly, but because a lady was the object of the quarrel, and I intend that lady shall be respected at my court, and that quarrel shall be put a stop to altogether. Manicamp bowed. And now, Monsieur de Manicamp, continued the king, what was said about Mademoiselle de la Valliere? Cannot your Majesty guess? Your Majesty can imagine the character of the jest in which young men permit themselves to indulge. They very probably said that she was in love with someone. The king ventured to remark. Probably so. But Mademoiselle de la Valliere has a perfect right to love anyone she pleases, said the king. That is the very point de Guiche maintained. And on account of which he fought, do you mean? Yes, sire, the sole and only cause. The king colored. And you do not know anything more then? In what respect, sire? In the very interesting respect which you are now referring to. What does your Majesty wish to know? Why, the name of the man with whom La Valliere is in love, and whom De Guiche's adversary disputed her right to love. Sire, I know nothing, I have heard nothing, and have learnt nothing, even accidentally, but de Guiche is a noble-hearted fellow, and if momentarily he substituted himself in the place or stead of La Valliere's protector, it was because that protector was himself of too exalted a position to undertake her defense. These words were more than transparent. They made the king blush, but this time with pleasure. He struck Manicamp gently on the shoulder. Well, Monsieur de Manicamp, you are not only a ready, witty fellow, but a brave gentleman besides, and your friend de Guiche is a paladin quite after my own heart. You will express that to him from me. Your Majesty forgives me, then? Completely. And I am free? The king smiled and held out his hand to Manicamp, which he took and kissed respectfully. And then, added the king, you relate stories so charmingly. Sire. You told me in the most admirable manner the particulars of the accident which happened to Guiche. I can see the wild boar rushing out of the wood. I can see the horse fall down fighting with his head, and the boar rush from the horse to the rider. You do not simply relate a story well, you positively paint its incidents. Sire, I think your Majesty condescends to laugh at my expense, said Manicamp. On the contrary, said Louis seriously, I have so little intention of laughing, Monsieur de Manicamp, that I wish you to relate this adventure to every one. The adventure of the hunt? Yes, in the same manner you told it to me, without changing a single word. You understand? Perfectly, sire. And you will relate it, then? Without losing a minute. Very well. And now summon him, D'Artagnan. I hope you are no longer afraid of him. Oh, sire, from the very moment I am sure of your Majesty's kind disposition, I no longer fear anything. Call him then, said the king. Manicamp opened the door and said, Gentlemen, the king wishes you to return. D'Artagnan, Saint-Aignan, and Valliere entered. Gentlemen, said the king, I summoned you for the purposes of saying that Monsieur de Manicamp's explanation has entirely satisfied me. D'Artagnan glanced at Valliere and Saint-Aignan, as much as to say, Well, did I not tell you so? The king led Manicamp to the door, and then in a low tone of voice said, See that M. de Guiche takes good care of himself, and particularly that he recovers as soon as possible. I am very desirous of thanking him in the name of every lady, but let him take special care that he does not begin again. Were he to die 100 times, sire, he would begin again if your Majesty's honor were in any way called in question. This remark was direct enough, but we have already said that the incense of flattery was very pleasing to the king, and provided he received it, he was not very particular as to its quality. Very well, he said as he dismissed Manicamp. I will see de Guiche myself and make him listen to reason. And as Manicamp left the apartment, the king turned round towards the 3 spectators of this scene, and said, Tell me, Monsieur d'Artagnan, how does it happen that your sight is so imperfect? You whose eyes are generally so very good. My sight bad, sire? Certainly. It must be the case since your Majesty says so. But in what respect, may I ask? Why, with regard to what occurred in the Bois Rochin. Certainly. You pretended to have seen the tracks of 2 horses, to have detected the footprints of 2 men, and have described the particulars of an engagement, which you assert took place. Nothing of the sort occurred, pure illusion on your part. Said D'Artagnan. Exactly the same thing with the galloping to and fro of the horses, and the other indications of a struggle. It was the struggle of de Guiche against the wild boar, and absolutely nothing else. Only the struggle was a long and a terrible one, it seems. Continued D'Artagnan. And when I think that I almost believed it for a moment, but then you told it with such confidence. I admit, sire, that I must have been very short-sighted, said D'Artagnan, with a readiness of humor which delighted the king. You do admit it, then? Admit it, sire, most assuredly I do. So now that you see the thing in quite a different light from that in which I saw it half an hour ago. And to what, then, do you attribute this difference in your opinion? Oh, a very simple thing, sire. Half an hour ago I returned from Bois Rochin, where I had nothing to light me but a stupid stable lantern. While now I have all the wax lights of your cabinet, and more than that, your Majesty's own eyes, which illuminate everything, like the blazing sun at noonday. The king began to laugh, and Saint-Aignan broke out into convulsions of merriment. It is precisely like M. Valliere, said D'Artagnan, resuming the conversation where the king had left off. He has been imagining all along that not only was M. de Guiche wounded by a bullet, but still more, that he extracted it even from his chest. Upon my word, said Valliere. I assure you. Now did you not believe that? Continued D'Artagnan. Yes, said Valliere. Not only did I believe it, but at this very moment I would swear it. Well, my dear doctor, you have dreamt it. I have dreamt it. M. de Guiche's wound, a mere dream, the bullet a dream. So take my advice and prate no more about it. Well said, returned the king. M. D'Artagnan's advice is sound. Do not speak of your dream to any one, Monsieur Valliere, and upon the word of a gentleman, you will have no occasion to repent it. Good evening, gentlemen. A very sad affair indeed is a wild boar hunt. A very serious thing indeed, repeated D'Artagnan in a loud voice, is a wild boar hunt. And he repeated it in every room through which he passed, and left the chateau, taking Valliere with him. And now we are alone, said the king to Saint Aignan. What is the name of De Guiche's adversary? Saint Aignan looked at the king. Oh, do not hesitate, said the king. You know that I am bound beforehand to forgive. De Wardes, said Saint Aignan. Very good, said Louis XIV. And then, retiring to his own room, added to himself, to forgive is not to forget. Chapter 20. Showing the advantage of having two strings to one's bow. Manicamp quitted the king's apartment, delighted at having succeeded so well, when just as he reached the bottom of the staircase and was passing a doorway, he felt that someone suddenly pulled him by the sleeve. He turned round and recognized Montalice, who was waiting for him in the passage, and who, in a very mysterious manner, with her body bent forward, and in a low tone of voice, said to him, "Follow me, monsieur, and without any delay if you please." "Where to, mademoiselle?" inquired Manicamp. In the first place, a true knight would not have asked such a question, but would have followed me without requiring any explanation. "Well, mademoiselle, I am quite ready to conduct myself as a true knight." "No, it is too late, and you cannot take the credit of it. We are going to madame's apartment, so come at once." "Ah," said Manicamp. "Lead on then." And he followed Montalice, who ran before him as light as Galatea. "This time," said Manicamp, as he followed his guide, "I do not think that stories about hunting expeditions would be acceptable. We will try, however, and if need be, well, if there should be any occasion for it, we must try something else." Montalice still ran on. "How fatiguing it is," thought Manicamp, "to have need of one's head and legs at the same time." At last, however, they arrived. Madame had just finished undressing, and was in a most elegant deshabille, but it must be understood that she had changed her dress before she had any idea of being subjected to the emotions now agitating her. She was waiting with the most restless impatience, and Montalice and Manicamp found her standing near the door. At the sound of their approaching footsteps, Madame came forward to meet them. "Ah," she said, "at last." "Here is Manicamp," replied Montalice. Manicamp bowed with the greatest respect. Madame signed to Montalice to withdraw, and she immediately obeyed. Madame followed her with her eyes in silence, until the door closed behind her, and then, turning towards Manicamp, said, "What is the matter? And is it true, as I am told, Monsieur de Manicamp, that someone is lying wounded in the chateau?" "Yes, madame, unfortunately so, Monsieur de Guiche." "Yes, Monsieur de Guiche," repeated the princess. "I had, in fact, heard it rumored but not confirmed, and so, in truth, it is Monsieur de Guiche who has been thus unfortunate." "De Guiche himself, madame." "Are you aware, de Manicamp," said the princess hastily, "that the king has the strongest antipathy to duels?" "Perfectly so, madame, but a duel with a wild beast is not answerable." "Oh, you will not insult me by supposing that I credit the absurd fable, with what object I cannot tell, respecting de Guiche having been wounded by a wild boar. No, no, monsieur. The real truth is known, and in addition to the inconvenience of his wound, de Guiche runs the risk of losing his liberty if not his life." "Alas! Madame, I am well aware of that, but what is to be done?" "You have seen the king?" "Yes, madame." "What did you say to him?" "I told him how de Guiche went to the chase, and how a wild boar rushed forth out of the boirochen, how de Guiche fired at it, and how, in fact, the furious brute dashed at de Guiche, killed his horse, and grievously wounded himself." "And the king believed that?" "Implicitly." "Oh, you surprise me, Monsieur de Manicamp. You surprise me very much." And Madame walked up and down the room, casting a searching look from time to time at Manicamp, who remained motionless and impassible in the same place. At last she stopped. "And yet," she said, "every one here seems unanimous in giving another cause for this wound." "What cause, madame?" said Manicamp. "May I be permitted, without indiscretion, to ask your highness?" "You ask such a question. You De Guiche's intimate friend, his confidant, indeed." "Oh, madame." "His intimate friend, yes, confidant, no. De Guiche is a man who can keep his own secrets, who has some of his own certainly, but who never breathes a syllable about them. De Guiche is discretion itself, madame." "Very well, then. those secrets which M. de Guiche keeps so scrupulously, I shall have the pleasure of informing you of, said the princess, almost spitefully. For the king may possibly question you a second time, and if on the second occasion, you were to repeat the same story to him, he possibly might not be very well satisfied with it. But madam, I think your highness is mistaken with regard to the king. His majesty was perfectly satisfied with me, I assure you. In that case, permit me to assure you, Monsieur de Manicamp, it only proves one thing, which is, that his majesty is very easily satisfied. I think your highness is mistaken in arriving at such an opinion. His majesty is well known not to be contented except with very good reason. And do you suppose that he will thank you for your officious falsehood, when he will learn tomorrow that M. de Guiche had, on behalf of his friend M. de Bragelonne, a quarrel which ended in a hostile meeting? A quarrel on M. de Bragelonne's account, said Manicamp, with the most innocent expression in the world. What does your royal highness do me the honor to tell me? What is there astonishing in that? M. de Guiche is susceptible, irritable, and easily loses his temper. On the contrary, madam, I know M. de Guiche to be very patient, and never susceptible or irritable except upon very good grounds. But is not friendship a just ground? Said the princess. Oh, certainly, madam, and particularly for a heart like his. Very good. You will not deny, I suppose, that M. de Bragelonne is M. de Guiche's good friend? A great friend. Well then, M. de Guiche has taken M. de Bragelonne's part, and as M. de Bragelonne was absent and could not fight, he fought for him. Manicamp began to smile, and moved his head and shoulders very slightly, as much as to say, "Oh, if you will positively have it so." "But speak at all events," said the princess out of patience. "Speak." Of course. It is quite clear you are not of my opinion, and that you have something to say." "I have only one thing to say, madam." "Name it." "That I do not understand a single word of what you have just been telling me." "What? You do not understand a single word about M. de Guiche's quarrel with M. de Wardes," exclaimed the princess, almost out of temper. Manicamp remained silent. "A quarrel," she continued, "which arose out of a conversation scandalous in its tone and purport, and more or less well-founded, respecting the virtue of a certain lady." "Ah, of a certain lady. This is quite another thing," said Manicamp. "You begin to understand, do you not? Your highness will excuse me, but I dare not." "You dare not," said madame, exasperated. "Very well then, wait one moment, I will dare." Madam," exclaimed Manicamp, as if in great dismay, "be careful of what you are going to say. It would seem, monsieur, that if I happened to be a man, you would challenge me, notwithstanding his majesty's edicts, as Monsieur de Guiche challenged M. de Wardes, and that, too, on account of the virtue of Mademoiselle de la Valliere." "Of Mademoiselle de la Valliere!" exclaimed Manicamp, starting backwards, as if that was the very last name he expected to hear pronounced. "What makes you start in that manner, Monsieur de Manicamp?" said madame ironically. "Do you mean to say you would be impertinent enough to suspect that young lady's honor?" "Madam, in the whole course of this affair there has not been the slightest question of Mademoiselle de la Valliere's honor." "What? When two men have almost blown each other's brains out on a woman's behalf, do you mean to say she has had nothing to do with the affair, and that her name has not been called in question at all? I did not think you so good a courtier, Monsieur de Manicamp." "Pray forgive me, madam," said the young man, "but we are very far from understanding one another. You do me the honor to speak one language while I am speaking altogether another. I beg your pardon, but I do not understand your meaning." "Forgive me then, but I fancied I understood your highness to remark that de Guiche and de Wardes had fought on Mademoiselle de la Valliere's account?" "Certainly." "On account of Mademoiselle de la Valliere, I think you said?" repeated Manicamp. "I do not say that M. de Guiche personally took an interest in Mademoiselle de la Valliere, but I say that he did so as representing or acting on behalf of another." "On behalf of another?" "Come, do not always assume such a bewildered look. Does not everyone here know that M. de Bragelonne is affianced to Mademoiselle de la Valliere, and that before he went on the mission with which the king entrusted him, he charged his friend M. de Guiche to watch over that interesting young lady? There is nothing more for me to say then. Your highness is well informed." Of everything. I beg you to understand that clearly. Manicamp began to laugh, which almost exasperated the princess, who was not, as we know, of a very patient disposition. Madam, resumed the discreet Manicamp, saluting the princess, let us bury this affair altogether in forgetfulness, for it will probably never be quite cleared up. Oh, as far as that goes there is nothing more to do, and the information is complete. The king will learn that M. de Guiche has taken up the cause of this little adventuress, who gives herself all the airs of a grand lady. He will learn that Monsieur de Bragelonne, having nominated his friend M. de Guiche his guardian in ordinary, the latter immediately fastened, as he was required to do, upon the Marquis de Wardes, who ventured to trench upon his privileges. Moreover, you cannot pretend to deny, Monsieur Manicamp, you who know everything so well, that the king on his side casts a longing eye upon this famous treasure, and that he will bear no slight grudge against M. de Guiche for constituting himself its defender. Are you sufficiently well informed now, or do you require anything further? If so, speak, monsieur. No, madam, there is nothing more I wish to know. Learn, however, for you ought to know it, Monsieur de Manicamp. Learn that His Majesty's indignation will be followed by terrible consequences. In princes of a similar temperament to that of His Majesty, the passion which jealousy causes sweeps down like a whirlwind. Which you will temper, madam. I, exclaimed the princess, with a gesture of indescribable irony. I, and by what title, may I ask? Because you detest injustice, madam. And according to your account, then, it would be an injustice to prevent the king arranging his love affairs as he pleases. You will intercede, however, in M. de Guiche's favor? You are mad, monsieur, said the princess in a haughty tone of voice. On the contrary, I am in the most perfect possession of my senses. And I repeat, you will defend M. de Guiche before the king. Why should I? Because the cause of M. de Guiche is your own, madam, said Manicamp, with ardor kindling in his eyes. What do you mean by that? I mean, madam, that, with respect to the defense which Monsieur de Guiche undertook in M. de Bragelonne's absence, I am surprised that your highness has not detected a pretext in La Valliere's name having been brought forward. A pretext? But a pretext for what? Repeated the princess hesitatingly, for Manicamp's steady look had just revealed something of the truth to her. I trust, madam, said the young man, I have said sufficient to induce your highness not to overwhelm before His Majesty my poor friend, de Guiche, against whom all the malevolence of a party bitterly opposed to your own will now be directed. You mean, on the contrary, I suppose, that all those who have no great affection for Mademoiselle de la Valliere, and even perhaps a few of those who have some regard for her, will be angry with the Comte. Oh, madam, why will you push your obstinacy to such an extent, and refuse to open your ears and listen to the counsel of one whose devotion to you is unbounded? Must I expose myself to the risk of your displeasure? Am I really to be called upon to name, contrary to my own wish, the person who was the real cause of this quarrel? The person, said madame, blushing. Must I, continued Manicamp, tell you how poor de Guiche became irritated, furious, exasperated beyond all control, at the different rumors now being circulated about this person? Must I, if you persist in this willful blindness, and if respect should continue to prevent me naming her? Must I repeat, recall to your recollection the various scenes which Monsieur had with the Duke of Buckingham, and the insinuations which were reported respecting the Duke's exile? Must I remind you of the anxious care the Comte always took in his efforts to please, to watch, to protect that person for whom alone he lives, for whom alone he breathes? Well, I will do so, and when I shall have made you recall all the particulars I refer to, you will perhaps understand how it happened that the Comte, having lost all control over himself, and having been for some time past almost harassed to death by de Wardes, became, at the first disrespectful expression which the latter pronounced respecting the person in question, inflamed with passion, and panted only for an opportunity of avenging the affront. The princess concealed her face with her hands. Monsieur, monsieur, she exclaimed, do you know what you are saying, and to whom you are speaking? And so, madam, pursued Manicamp, as if he had not heard the exclamations of the princess, nothing will astonish you any longer. Neither the Comte's ardor in seeking the quarrel, nor his wonderful address in transferring it to a quarter foreign to your own personal interests, That latter circumstance was, indeed, a marvelous instance of tact and perfect coolness, and if the person in whose behalf the Count so fought and shed his blood does, in reality, owe some gratitude to the poor wounded sufferer, it is not on account of the blood he has shed, or the agony he has suffered, but for the steps he has taken to preserve from comment or reflection an honor, which is more precious to him than his own. "Oh," cried Madame, as if she had been alone. "Is it possible the quarrel was on my account?" Manicamp felt he could now breathe for a moment, and gallantly had he won the right to do so. Madame, on her side, remained for some time plunged in a painful reverie. Her agitation could be seen by her quick respiration, by her drooping eyelids, by the frequency with which she pressed her hand upon her heart. But in her, coquetry was not so much a passive quality, as on the contrary, a fire which sought for fuel to maintain itself, finding anywhere and everywhere what it required. "If it be as you assert," she said, "the Count will have obliged two persons at the same time, for Monsieur de Bragelonne also owes a deep debt of gratitude to M. de Guiche, and with far greater reason, indeed, because everywhere, and on every occasion, Mademoiselle de la Valliere will be regarded as having been defended by this generous champion." Manicamp perceived that there still remained some lingering doubt in the princess's heart. "A truly admirable service indeed," he said, "is the one he has rendered to Mademoiselle de la Valliere. A truly admirable service to M. de Bragelonne. The duel has created a sensation which, in some respects, casts a dishonorable suspicion upon that young girl. A sensation, indeed, which will embroil her with the Vicomte. The consequence is that De Wardes's pistol bullet has had 3 results instead of 1. It destroys at the same time the honor of a woman, the happiness of a man, and perhaps it has wounded to death one of the best gentlemen in France. Oh, madam, your logic is cold, even calculating. It always condemns, it never absolves." Manicamp's concluding words scattered to the winds the last doubt which lingered, not in Madame's heart, but in her mind. She was no longer a princess full of scruples, nor a woman with her ever-returning suspicions, but one whose heart has just felt the mortal chill of a wound. "Wounded to death," she murmured, in a faltering voice. "Oh, Monsieur de Manicamp, did you not say wounded to death?" Manicamp returned no other answer than a deep sigh. "And so you said that the Count is dangerously wounded?" continued the princess. "Yes, madam, one of his hands is shattered, and he has a bullet lodged in his breast." "Gracious heavens!" resumed the princess with a feverish excitement. "This is horrible. Monsieur de Manicamp. A hand shattered, do you say, and a bullet in his breast? And that coward, that wretch, that assassin De Wardes did it." Manicamp seemed overcome by a violent emotion. He had, in fact, displayed no little energy in the latter part of his speech. As for Madame, she entirely threw aside all regard for the formal observances of propriety society imposes, for when with her, passion spoke in accents either of anger or sympathy, nothing could restrain her impulses. Madame approached Manicamp, who had subsided in a chair, as if his grief were a sufficiently powerful excuse for his infraction of the laws of etiquette. "Monsieur," she said, seizing him by the hand, "be frank with me." Manicamp looked up. "Is M. de Guiche in danger of death?" "Doubly so, madam," he replied. "In the first place on account of the hemorrhage which has taken place, an artery having been injured in the hand, and next in consequence of the wound in his breast, which may, the doctor is afraid at least, have injured some vital part." "He may die then?" "Die, yes, madam, and without even having had the consolation of knowing that you have been told of his devotion." "You will tell him?" "I. Yes. Are you not his friend?" "I. Oh no, madam. I will only tell M. de Guiche if indeed he is still in a condition to hear me. I will only tell him what I have seen. That is, your cruelty to him." "Oh, monsieur, you will not be guilty of such barbarity." "Indeed, madam, I shall speak the truth, for nature is very energetic in a man of his age. The physicians are clever men, and if, by chance, the poor Count should survive his wound, I should not wish him to die of a wound of the heart, after surviving one of the body." Manicamp rose, and with an expression of profoundest respect, seemed to be desirous of taking leave. "At least, monsieur," said Madame, stopping him with almost a suppliant air, "you will be kind enough to tell me in what state your wounded friend is, and who is the physician who attends him?" As regards the state he is in, madam, he is seriously ill. His physician is M. Valliere, His Majesty's private medical attendant. M. Valliere is moreover assisted by a professional friend, to whose house M. de Guiche has been carried. What? He is not in the chateau? Said madam. Alas, madam, the poor fellow was so ill, that he could not even be conveyed thither. Give me the address, monsieur, said the princess hurriedly. I will send to inquire after him. Rue du Fer, a brick-built house with white outside blinds. The doctor's name is on the door. You are returning to your wounded friend, Monsieur de Manicamp? Yes, madam. You will be able, then, to do me a service. I am at your highness's orders. Do what you intended to do. Return to M. de Guiche. Send away all those whom you may find there, and have the kindness yourself to go away too. Madam, let us waste no time in useless explanations. Accept the fact as I present it to you. See nothing in it beyond what is really there, and ask nothing further than what I tell you. I am going to send one of my ladies, perhaps two, because it is now getting late. I do not wish them to see you, or rather I do not wish you to see them. These are scruples you can understand. You particularly, Monsieur de Manicamp, who seem capable of divining so much. Oh, madam, perfectly. I can even do better still. I will precede, or rather walk, in advance of your attendants. It will, at the same time, be the means of showing them the way more accurately, and of protecting them, if occasion arises, though there is no probability of their needing protection. And by this means, then, they would be sure of entering without difficulty, would they not? Certainly, madam, for as I should be the first to pass, I thus remove any difficulties that might chance to be in the way. Very well. Go, Monsieur de Manicamp, and wait at the bottom of the staircase. I go at once, madam. Stay. Manicamp paused. When you hear the footsteps of two women descending the stairs, go out, and without once turning round, take the road which leads to where the poor count is lying. But if by any mischance, two other persons were to descend, and I were to be mistaken, you will hear one of the two clap her hands together softly. Go. Manicamp turned round, bowed once more, and left the room, his heart overflowing with joy. In fact, he knew very well that the presence of Madame herself would be the best balm to apply to his friend's wounds. A quarter of an hour had hardly elapsed when he heard the sound of a door open softly, and closed with like precaution. He listened to the light footfalls gliding down the staircase, and then heard the signal agreed upon. He immediately went out, and faithful to his promise, bent his way, without once turning his head, through the streets of Fontainebleau, towards the doctor's dwelling.